Hello, my fellow Westorians. Isn't it great to be back? I do love the week to week. Of course, we've been doing week to week for years now, off and on, but this is a different style week to week because it's new. Usually we're digging deep, doing research and presenting it to y'all. This time we're all watching together. We're still doing the digging deep and doing the research, but the information we're studying is fresh. I love it. I'm so happy to be back, and I think Ashea and Sean are as well. How you feeling, Sean? Excited?
Oh yeah, it's almost surreal to be back at this TV coverage of the Song of Ice and Fire world, and it's also worth noting that usually we have at least a week to prep for what we're doing. It's barely been 12 hours.
Yeah.
I'm still processing. I guarantee you 5 minutes after we're done with this, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, I got this new idea.
That's right. Well, thankfully, we also have episodes on Saturdays. This is our Monday at 6 o'clock live stream, which will be posted as a podcast and be available on YouTube as well each time. But we'll also be doing Saturday streams at 3. Sean will be on the Monday streams. We'll have guests for the Saturday streams. We'll be discussing things to come on Saturday streams. We'll be having spoilers, previews, things like that. But on Mondays, we'll focus entirely on the episode that just happened, maybe just a little bit of what's to come based on things that are set up. Now, let's reintroduce ourselves a little bit. Some of y'all will be new listeners to History of Westeros. A lot of y'all know what our deal is, but for those of you who are new, we'll lay out a few things. My name is Aziz. I've been a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire for over 20 years. I've read Storm of Swords when it was new, and we are huge fans of this world. We've been doing this podcast for 10 years now, and it is super fun. Sean, you are somewhat unsullied, not entirely unsullied. When you started on the show, you hadn't read anything, but you have read some things now. Tell people where you're at with your knowledge and what's new to you and what isn't, and that'll help explain what we're all about here.
Yeah, at this point, I've read all of the main books, the main novels of the series, Game of Thrones, Feast for Crows, all that. And I've read the Dunk and Egg novellas, which I love and highly recommend. Anyone out there who hasn't read them,
oh, yeah.
you should definitely read them. And I've read a large portion of the World of Ice and Fire. We were doing a quote-unquote reread of that book, but we're kind of jumping through it and using it as jump-off points for other topics, But because of that, I've been able to avoid most of the Targaryen stuff that might lead into this Fire and Blood stuff, so that I can't help but be exposed to it, right?
Yeah.
Like I have some generic ideas. I know there is a Dance with Dragons, some sort of Targaryen civil war. Even before I watched this first episode, I knew there was a character, Corlys Velaryon,
yeah.
Velaryon, who is some sort of sailor. I got the idea he's in the same time period as Daemon, but the details of like the timeline, at some point I might have even learned it, one character or another died. But there's a difference between like having read that one time amongst all the other dense information that I read and knowing it and understanding it, putting it in context and everything. So I'm not purely unsullied.
Yeah.
But I definitely don't know where this story is going exactly. I have some guesses. Some of them are probably pretty close and maybe even subconsciously clouded by data that's in my brain. But
so
I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of times when I say something and people out there are like, doesn't he know?
The answer is no. Yeah. So we're trying to approach it with someone who, Shea as well, is very knowledgeable about the series. Shea here is behind the camera for this episode. Oftentimes she will be in front of the camera, just not today. We've had a lot of preparation to do to get ready for the season. She does a lot of our technical stuff behind the scenes. So today she's managing it there, but she'll weigh in on some topics as well. So we've got me and her that know the material quite well. Sean, who is a little fresher to it. And so between that, we have a lot of different style takes. We hope that gives us a broad view, a wide array of coverage and opinions. We'll progress through each episode. Each scene, for the most part, we'll cover, or then we'll pick up certain threads that we passed over, because obviously there's lots going on in a lot of these scenes. We'll also discuss themes and patterns, characters and backstory. And like I said, a lot of the more spoilery stuff will be on the Saturday episodes. And I want to shout out our new intro sequence from Brandon Winslow, aka Bran the Builder, good friend of ours. It's blowing up on YouTube already. People are watching it. And it's interesting because we haven't seen the actual intro to the show yet. It wasn't part of the first episode. There was some, even from us as well, some wondering about that. We thought, maybe they're saving it for episode 2. Well, that is the case. They're saving it for episode 2. So you will see the proper full new intro sequence next week, and we'll be sure to talk about that. But for now, the coolest one we have is ours, the one that Bran made. It's great. I hope you all loved it as much as we do. We're also interviewing Ryan Condal in a week, the showrunner of House of the Dragon. So we'll be asking some great questions. We'll have 2 episodes in the book by then that we'll be able to leverage for questions for him. And we just interviewed George R. R. Martin last week, just before the show is getting started. That interview will be up this week. It'll be up a couple days early for patrons and subscribers, and then up for everybody a couple days after that. So look out for that soon.
And that is a video interview.
A video interview. That's right. You get to see us in George R. R. Martin's house with all his cool decorations everywhere. He's got a stained glass Stark window, a stained glass Baratheon window. Man, his house is nerd paradise. We all wish we had an office like that. Well, write one of the greatest series ever written, and maybe you too can have a house with stained glass windows of your own design. Anyway, let's get to the episode. That's, I think, everything we needed to say to set things up. If I missed anything, well, we'll just get back to it later. We've got 10 weeks of this to cover it all. The Great Council is where things start, and so shall we. It's a little unusual to have a scene like this that's more of a flashback. We did have a few flashbacks in Game of Thrones proper, but not right at the beginning, right? And we certainly didn't have voiceovers, and we didn't have like text explaining what was happening. That's pretty new for Game of Thrones, but it's not some big change either. And it was pretty necessary, I think, to set this stuff up.
Yeah, I wanted to say, one, it really, really, to me, was reminiscent of Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring.
Okay.
The sound of the narrator, the tone, the imagery, like everything to me sounded very similar to Lord of the Rings, which one of the greatest movies ever, one of the greatest stories ever. I think it's fine to be compared to that.
Yeah.
And especially, part of why all this is so great is because it is so dense with so many different characters and storylines and history. It feels more real when this world has a real history, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And it's so fleshed out.
But it also can make it a little tougher for the casual viewer to just pick up on. And so I think it was definitely, even for me, I was appreciative of this setup. And I think especially for the masses out there, the clarification of like 172 years before Dany Targaryen. I think that was
that was really good.
It's humorous, but it's hard to understand what the average person is going through watching this. They really do need to clarify that. Think about the trailer they released ahead of time with George, given this sort of superficial explanation of like the houses involved. I think it's good to set the audience up for all this.
And with each week, we are releasing a synopsis video under 10 minutes to help you put all that together, to help explain it in a simple way. So I highly recommend checking that out. This first one is 8.5 minutes long before you listen to our live streams here. But of course, do it in any order you want. But that is my recommendation. Yeah, there is a lot to know. It isn't like a lot of other worlds where you don't have a lot to learn. There is a lot. This family stuff is frankly a bit confusing. It will become less confusing over time, and we have a strong handle on it, so we can always help you out. With that in mind, feel free to submit questions live or in advance. You can send them to us on Patreon, on Twitter, on Facebook. We have a Facebook group for History of Westeros. We have a Discord for History of Westeros. The links are in the description, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on podcasts. The links are there either way. And yeah, ask questions live. We'll answer them 2 different spots throughout the episode. We'll pause and take questions and settle all these things that might be a little confusing or perhaps theorize a bit. So Jaehaerys, to be clear, is Rhaenys' grandfather and Viserys' grandfather, but through his first 2 children. He had 2 sons who had children. Rhaenys was the daughter of the firstborn son, and Viserys was the son of the second-born son. So that's why it's a little confusing, and that's why Rhaenys maybe thought her claim was stronger, and arguably it is stronger. It does follow through the first son's line, but it not always. These aren't hard and fast rules.
Rhaenys is the one that they called the queen that never was. Right? And she is married to Corlys?
Yes, and he's always been a little upset that he thought she deserved it as well, maybe even more than she did. But that's something left to be explained by the characters as we go through it. So Jaehaerys is actually Viserys' grandfather twice over because his fourth and fifth children married each other. And yeah, not only is the family tree complicated, it's even harder because of all the incest. Aemma Arryn, Viserys' wife, you may have noticed she had silver hair. She's half Targaryen as well. So, and clearly her hair color came out to match that. You may have, funny note here, Jaehaerys himself is played by Michael Carter, who was Bib Fortuna in Star Wars. That's the dude, Shea is putting him on screen, the guy with this funny tentacle and the red eyes that was Jabba's right-hand man in Return of the Jedi. That's the same guy. How about that?
It's amazing that they surgically removed those tentacles from his head to play this role.
I know. That must have been very painful. But there's a lot of...
Really committed to it.
Yeah. A lot of painful things in this show, though. A lot of wounds. And you wonder... How did you interpret him there? He almost looks... He's supposed to be weary. He's lost a lot of his children. He lost his wife, he lost his right-hand man, and his wife was like his left-hand man, or woman rather. So he really relied on her and Septon Barth, and they're both gone by this time. And of course he lost his two eldest sons. So he's a sad guy. He had a strong reign. He overall ruled quite well, but it's not ending super well for him, and he fears what's to come next. What did you look disappointed in that choice, or did he just look tired to you?
I thought wary. I thought the whole scene seemed kind of somber.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. And it seemed like it was I can't think of the whole scenario is sort of a compromise that no one's going to war, but no one's happy either. That's the feel, the vibe I got from that great council presentation.
What do you think, Shea? Did you have a read on Viserys there, or on Jaehaerys there, or did you notice anything else about that scene you wanted to mention?
I thought he looked sad and old.
Yeah,
I agree. I do think he looked like he was at the end of his life, and yeah.
And he does die 2 years later. It says that we jump forward to 9 years into Viserys' reign. It doesn't actually tell you how much longer Jaehaerys' reign is. According to Fire and Blood, it's 2 more years. Of course, they may have changed that for the show, but as far as we know, it was 2 years later. Now, there's some other good acting in this scene. Rhaenys, her disappointment is in our notes here. Very, very notable. Her acting is incredible, I think, in general. A lot of great performances in this episode, which bodes really well for the rest of the run of the show.
Yeah, I think you could really see the gleam of disappointment in her eyes, like the tears in her eyes right here, I thought.
Yeah, and Viserys almost looked a little chagrined. Like, he looked a little like...
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't deserve it. I wanted
to point that out.
Or that he didn't want it.
Yeah, he didn't exactly like pump his fist like, yes, he seemed acceptant, resigned.
He was maybe a little honored. He smiled, but he wasn't like, he didn't do like his brother in the tournament. Like, I'm on top of the world. Yeah, he's just like, okay.
Good contrast, rather.
Yeah, and that's...
also...
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to point out another, just lining things up. Jaehaerys was in that scene. He was with his wife, Aemma, who was pregnant.
Viserys was with his wife, yeah.
Viserys,
yeah.
Sorry, I said that wrong. Viserys is with his wife, Aemma, as he's realizing he's going to be the king, and she's pregnant, and that must be Rhaenyra that she's pregnant with.
No.
Right?
No, incorrect.
No.
Rhaenyra that would have been one of... Remember how Aemma says she lost multiple children? She had multiple stillbirths. She lost children. Think this is when we see Rhaenyra, that's 11 years after that. Rhaenyra was not 11 years old when we see her in that scene.
She's more like 15 or 16 or 18.
It was unclear how old she was exactly right there.
But she's a lighter teenager.
The age, but definitively that was not Rhaenyra in the stomach. That was one of Aemma's.
Okay.
Remember, she says she had 2 other stillbirths and 2 other deaths in the cradle. That's one of those. Yeah.
But she also said in twice as many years. She said that's 5 and twice as many years, which would be 10 years.
Yeah, so she lost a child.
Said that this was 9 years.
Yeah, but the child, she hadn't lost it yet, though.
Yeah.
The child was presumably lost a few months later, or even...
Oh, and she still could have had Rhaenyra before she lost his other
she had
children.
her child
Rhaenyra was
she
before
lost
that.
all
Exactly.
of them.
That's why I'm asking.
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
happy to,
a lot of people in the chat were asking who Aemma was pregnant with, and yes, it was not Rhaenyra right there.
Right on. Yeah, good question. Yeah, exactly. This is a good example of different approaches, different angles that were taken here, different questions that people may have. Harrenhal looked really sweet as far as a ruined, grim castle can. And it may be a little bit ominous, a little foreshadowing. You determining the future of House Targaryen in a castle destroyed by House Targaryen, by the biggest dragon who ever lived that we know of, Balerion the Black Dread. And
that's another thought I had too. Just thinking about someone who's watching this show that hasn't read the books or even seen Game of Thrones. Did they make it clear that was Harrenhal? Do they know what the heck Harrenhal is?
I think they said it.
We get the average viewer doesn't.
Yeah, I think they said Harrenhal, but they didn't make it clear or remind people. But that's the castle that Arya goes to that's ruined with, where she's with Gregor, and then she serves Tywin in the show. In the books, it's Roose Bolton, but that same spot.
And it's a castle that was destroyed when the Targaryens first took over Westeros.
Exactly, yes. So
it was a massive castle that was just completed, and the dragons burned it down.
And that was only 100 years before this council. That was almost exactly 100 years, maybe 101 years before. So, yeah. And we next move on to this. Technically, what comes next is the voiceover, the rest of the voiceover and the showing of the dates. And we get to see the cloud cover, and we have Rhaenyra flying, and two of the most important young characters and a dragon. So Rhaenyra, Alicent, and Syrax. A little bit of humor here to start off. It's a little lighthearted before it gets pretty serious pretty fast. Alicent and Rhaenyra, it's interesting that she says no thanks to the riding, and I thought Rhaenyra's reaction to that was a little interesting. She paused and kind of was a little surprised, like, how could you not want to fly? Did you notice that when she just kind of stared forward for a minute, like she was surprised that Alicent had that reaction?
Yeah, she's like, I can't relate.
Yeah, can't relate. Yeah. I was like, of course, why would you not fly? Because she's loves it. Like when she's petting Syrax's neck, she loves her dragon and loves flying. That is very, very straightforwardly clear there, I think.
That is something she is raised to do, though.
Yes,
right? She's a Targaryen. I guarantee that's driven into her head. You're a Targaryen. You're a dragon rider. Here's your dragon egg when you're a baby. Like, it's part of her life, you know.
But less so from her own family, right? Because her mother, while half Targaryen, never rode a dragon, and her father rode Balerion when Balerion was in his waning years. So Viserys hasn't been a dragon rider in over like 17 years at this point, and never was one for very long because Balerion died not long after he claimed him. So really, this part of her family isn't as dragony as the others, which might be why they're like, you smell like dragon. They're not as used to it. I think that's a great little undertone. And not only was that funny, but this particular king and queen are not dragon riders. Almost never were they dragon riders. Like, Emma never was.
Yeah, it's like Daemon might not have ever commented on you smell like dragon because he smells like dragon all the time too.
Yeah, he wouldn't bother him so it's a little interesting little undertone. Great little detail there.
I also wonder, a couple points I want to make about this. If they're setting a stage for some future potential, like if they establish to us that dragons smell a certain way, they can use that as a storytelling tool later on through the show.
Yeah,
right?
That's true. Someone could
riding
be like,
a dragon they shouldn't have, or a dragon is nearby. Someone can detect it.
That's a great point. Yeah, that could be set up. You're totally right. I didn't think of it as set up, but it might be, yeah.
And I try, I can't always get it all. There's people better at it than me, but I try to think about almost everything that's happening in the show. Like, why are they showing this? What's the meaning here? And sometimes it's just cool. Sometimes it's some piece of history we that's interesting or we might need to know. But sometimes they're setting something up in the future. Sometimes it's symbolic. I thought it was very interesting. The opening scene was a dragon. That's the first thing we see. Dragon flying in the air. And then we see it's Rhaenyra riding the dragon. Then flies over King's Landing, which is the setting that we're at. Also, in King's Landing, it was interesting that as the dragon flew by, it kind of showed like the hustle and bustle of city streets, and maybe one or two people looked up at the dragon flying by, but it's kind of commonplace activity, right? Yeah. Like maybe in modern day, kind of like every time a plane goes by, a plane flies by, everyone would stop and look, a plane,
But not if you live by the airport.
Yeah. In 1930, that might have been more outstanding of a thing to happen. But like in this world, dragons flying around, it's kind of normal.
So like that was a detail that I believe it was Ryan Condal even pointed out. He's like, yeah, well, most of the people in that you see walking around the hustle and bustle, they see dragons all the time. As it's introduced at the beginning, they say during the old King's time, there's 10 adult dragons right around there. So yeah, it's not an uncommon sight. But some of the people are foreigners. Some people are visitors to King's Landing, and they would be the ones going, looking up and watching it in full flight and being impressed.
Young teenagers, 13-year-olds might be more impressed, right?
Yeah,
and,
exactly. So, and some people like Alicent are like, I don't want anything that is scary. I'll stay over here. And even the Kingsguard, Harold Westerling's like, every day you come back is the day they don't put my head on a spike. So he's a little wary too. The dragons are scarier to most people than they are to this one family that grows up with them. But even this one family is a little bit scared of them, or at least not pleased with the smell.
Has a healthy fear, at least,
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more here. There's Viserys' punchline as well. It sets us up with a little more humor. He's got a punchline with no joke, which is kind of a callback to the recurring feature in the books where we get the first part of something really important and then it gets interrupted before we can hear the conclusion, whether it's a joke or not. The old interrupting the lore trick that we've referred to many times before on our book coverage shows.
Yeah, same with Tyrion's joke about the jackass and the honeycomb.
Yeah, we never get to hear the punchline,
but not the setup, and it's vice versa.
You can imagine the joke. It's still funny, even.
Yeah, like he's looking in the wrong end. The end of so you can imagine why that might be funny, but I don't know.
That was a lead into a council meeting.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
that broke. And again, I think they show that because we're seeing this is not somber, right? Like that great council was a serious, somber moment. Viserys is joking around, and through the course of it, he doesn't. Corlys is warning about these guys, like, isn't that good news? He's not taking it that serious. Maybe he's not as crappy as Robert Baratheon was as a king, but he doesn't seem to be really invested in his role as the king.
I agree.
The minutiae of ruling, at least.
I agree. He is not an active ruler. He's not someone who looks for problems and solves them. He waits for the problems and deals with them or hands them off to someone else. Yeah, he's not as lazy as Robert, and maybe he's not even lazy at all, but he is in that mold of lackadaisical maybe, and this definitely the vibe you get. They're joking, and then pretty quickly Corlys stands up and is like, we got a problem here. And they, like you said, they frame it as a good thing. And he's like, no, are you kidding me? Like, pirates are a nuisance, but if this triarchy, these 3 nations have control over the Stepstones, that's a real problem. They're much more dangerous than pirates. Are you kidding me? They're a whole nation, 3 nations. And they're going to extract taxes from us or keep our ships back. Like, this is a big problem. They're like, yeah, but the tournament.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you see, they're a little spoiled by their own success. This is the peak of House Targaryen. They're rich, they're successful, and they can't be bothered with some of the smaller problems because everything seems to be going so well. And there's a lot of little hints that things aren't actually as good as they think they are. They're just good from where they're sitting. When Daemon comes in and announces, hey, maybe things are a little more violent in the city than you're giving it credit for. We'll come back to that, but that's a good example of maybe they haven't been ruling the way they should. And if you go through this small council, we're leading up to the tournament, of course, the council brings us towards that. We have a group of counselors who they don't really distinguish themselves, at least not yet, maybe except for Corlys. You have Lyman Beesbury, Master of Coin. During the tournament, he makes a small bet on Daemon. Like 5 coins. He bets 5 gold, which maybe I'm reading too much into this. Becomes off as a little petty or maybe miserly, and that adds to the theme of underfunding and just things being in disrepair. Like if this guy's in charge of the money and he doesn't want to put money into investments. He's not willing to spend money on public works, which Jaehaerys did. You could see why maybe things aren't too much tax revenue is being kept by the rich people and not being spent on public works and administration and things that you would expect. They're complaining about the expenditure on the city watch. It sounds like they should have spent that money before and maybe given it to somebody a little less brutal, but it does sound like it needed to be done. And it sounded like it needed to be done for a while. What do you think about that?
I took that as being that bet being made. Some of my thoughts don't take away from yours at all.
Yeah.
Like it could be all these things. Like that it is worried about the wrong things, right? Like betting on his tournament. It kind of even goes back to the joking and the blowing of Corlys at the council meeting, that they're just not worried about the big picture. Maybe he's worried about more like this personal gain or this tournament rather than the finances of the realm or the future of the kingdom and things like that.
Yeah, he not necessarily comes off as like a better person, although I think you could make that argument. He comes off as more serious, more focused, which, like you say, it might be because he's after his own ends, which there's definitely some of that going on. But you also get the sense that if he were higher rank, things would be a little more well run. At least they'd be smoothed out somewhat. And that's also reflected by him being the one to not drink. He's like, no, I'm taking this more seriously. I'm not here to party. I'm here to make good decisions and to get things done. You have Grand Maester Mellos there, who has a pretty big role in this episode. I think it's implied he's declining a bit. Maybe a bit of a Maester Crescent situation. Like, at one point, remember when Viserys has his wound, that nasty little festering wound on his back, which is very symbolic of what's going on in the kingdom. This festering wasn't treated right away, and so it's gotten worse, right? And now they have to burn it out. But it's this harsh solution for a problem that could have been dealt with a lot gentler if they had dealt with it right away. So I think, but what happens is he's like, well, we could do this, we could do that. And then the young Maester's like, well, we could cauterize it. He's like, we should cauterize it. That's what Mellos immediately seizes on this. It's like he didn't think of it. So I get the sense that maybe he's lost a step.
I feel like it.
He should have retired, maybe.
I was worried that he was gonna we should cauterize and be like, no, that's terrible idea, but he did at least listen to the younger Maester, which is a good sign.
I think some people put him down as villainous, which is maybe the case, but I think maybe he's just losing it, maybe.
Maybe inept, but I took it even a different way. He might actually be pretty shrewd. He might have known that was the appropriate thing to do, but he didn't want to be the one to suggest it. Someone else suggested, then he backs it up.
Yeah, because Viserys didn't like it. He's like, fine, we'll do that. Yeah, so he wasn't happy about it, but he accepted it. So that's something to consider with Maester Mellos. And of course, there's the long-running Grand Maester conspiracy, so we'll keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on the fact that maybe some of the things he did were more intentional. But I didn't see a whole lot of evidence that in this first episode, mostly just the possibility remains, but there's not a lot of direct evidence of it. Harwin Strong, important character. He's the Master of Laws. It's also perhaps implied that he's a bit lax, especially if the city has become unsafe and the laws aren't being enforced. That seems to be on him. Although it's also implied that Daemon had that job before him and wasn't very good at it, so maybe he hasn't had the job very long. Also, it's important that he's the Lord of Harrenhal. So that's also important that this whole thing was held at his seat 11 years before. And he was Lord even then.
I wanted to point out that another thing I think they were trying to show us, Otto, the Hand of the King, Otto Hightower, rolls over Lord Strong.
Totally
right?
does.
This might have been a later moment, but he's asked a question, he starts to answer, and he just totally talks over him. And so I think that might be relevant in some way. I don't know if maybe that whole council, Daemon seemed to imply the whole council is just kind of there to tell the king what he wants to hear. Or I don't know if we can trust Daemon's interpretation of the scenario, but definitely Otto is in charge. Lord Strong is not really getting his way. You know how that Otto is.
Yeah.
I also wanted to point out a second ago, you referenced when we were talking about Maester Mello, you mentioned Maester Crescent.
Yeah.
Mellos, sorry. Yeah. Mellos. You mentioned Crescent.
Yeah.
He was
Stannis' Maester at the beginning of Clash of Kings.
Maester.
Yeah, he had his own chapter.
What was the parallel you were saying between him and
that they're
Crescent?
old and declining, that they may not be they may not be as good as they used to be at their job. Like he's maybe at retirement age. There's a lot of course there's a lot of jobs you can do into very late age and quite competently, but medicine maybe is one of the ones where you don't keep up with new information. Maybe physically your hands aren't as steady. Yeah, that's one that's tough if you're declining. But it's also a point of pride. Like it's hard to just make someone retire. A Grand Maester is appointed by the Citadel, not by the king. So it's tricky there.
Also, Crescent was still good and loyal, right?
Yes.
Even maybe if he had some flaws,
he loved Stannis.
He wasn't conniving or bad or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he tried to kill Melisandre, but he thought he was helping, and of course he killed himself instead, but that's Melisandre for you. And so Prince Daemon's commander of the City Watch, and it's said that he has held several different jobs before this one. Interestingly, there's no Master of Whispers, which I take as another sign of a lax administration. Some people say, oh, well, that's like a dirty job. What do they need that for? Well, we saw it's really important. We've seen that a good Master of Whispers really can cause problems, but can really prevent a lot of problems too.
It kind of seems like Otto's the unofficial Master of Whispers because he literally says like, oh, I heard 3 different reports about Daemon in the brothel. So
it's a great point. Maybe his machinations have made that unnecessary. He wants to keep that in his corner.
Yeah.
I like that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts about it. I think that from Game of Thrones, especially, the Maester of Whispers was presented as sort of this shady character. But fundamentally, like all these different positions, you can equate to modern day stuff, right? Like the Hand of the King is sort of like, I don't know, the Prime Minister or the executive officer, whatever. The Master Corn is like the Secretary of Treasury, right? Master Whispers is like the intelligence agency, the CIA, or their intelligence officer, military, or whatever. Having information about what's going on, it isn't often, it's sort of underhanded and spies and stuff. But the fact is, it wins and loses battles.
Yeah,
like
it really
knowing
does.
when the bad guys are coming or where the bridge is, or just information about what's going on is super important. Do we know if in the past there was a Maester Whispers? Maybe they haven't established it yet.
No, there was one before. Okay. There was one for. I don't remember if. Aegon had one on his original council, and Jaehaerys had one as well, if I remember correctly. And there's going to be one appointed a bit later, so it's definitely going to be around, and it won't be the first one, I don't think. So so that's going to come back around. I think that's
a big flaw to not have one. And it's another thing. At first, I thought of as Otto Hightower, he seemed protagonistic. Maybe just because he's getting pitted against Daemon, who seems antagonistic. I'm sure all that's going to be
changes
great.
Pretty quick, doesn't it?
Yeah. But by the end, I was a little bit more suspicious of Hightower. And I wonder if not having a Maester Whispers is because he wants to be the Maester.
I think you're right. Yeah.
He might have told the king, we don't really need that. And then behind the scenes was like, go get me this information, put this person in charge, disseminate the spies.
And you can see why it would be easy for him to sell that idea to Viserys. Like, Viserys he's not super soft. He's not like Tytos Lannister or even Robert or his own grandfather or great-grandfather, Aenys Targaryen. But he is a bit of a pushover. He's one of the pushover that you can push him too far. Like, he has his limits. Yeah. We see him get angry a couple of times. He's got that fire in him. It just doesn't come up that often. It's there. So they're very they know how to manage him. I think they know where his limits. Someone like Otto is really good at getting him right up to that edge without upsetting him too much. Whereas Daemon kind of goes too far. That's kind of the...
Viserys does seem to have a sense of responsibility.
Yeah, he does.
But he might not be that good at it, or he might be too lax at it.
I agree.
Etc.
Yeah, he's not a bad guy, but he's definitely
Robert did not seem to have a sense of responsibility, right?
I agree.
He just think, I'm king, I do what I want.
Yeah.
He wasn't worried about money or wars or anything.
He's a much better king than that. And there's only, interesting too, there's only been 4 Targaryen kings to this point. And one of them was Maegor, who was awful. Like, clearly he's the worst. One was Aegon, who they all kind of worship. One was Jaehaerys, who was amazing, the old king that lasted the longest. And one was Aenys, who was even weaker than Jaehaerys. So he was more of a pushover. And civil wars happened as soon as the Conqueror died, basically, because they saw who was ascending. We're like, ooh, him we can push around. And they kind of did. But that's another story. So yeah, Otto, I really enjoy that portrayal. Rhys Ifan, shout out to him. At the end of each episode, we'll shout out our favorite performances and a few other things. We'll have our 3 for 3 at the end of each episode. He's not my pick, but he was close because he's got the perfect voice and demeanor for this role. Just, I'm in charge. Like, everything he says is so upright and proper, and Your Grace, like in that like very controlled tone of voice that sounds very authoritarian without being aggressive. Yeah. He's got a future, or has had a career in audiobooks if he wants it. I haven't looked into it to see if he's already done that, but he could do voiceovers and all that stuff. Yeah.
Another little observation I made, a little detail that makes me appreciate it, is he seems very comparable to Tywin.
Yeah.
Right. His physical appearance and presentation and vocals and everything in a lot of ways. But I felt like he looked maybe a little less, can't think of quite, like disheveled, not less disheveled, but more disheveled. He less put together than Tywin. And, I don't know, like his hair was just like a little uneven. I realized by the end of it, that might have been at least subtly. Apparently, his wife has died recently.
Yes.
He might not be sleeping well or grooming himself as well. That I don't know. I'd like to think at least that the showrunners had the makeup artists present him that way.
Tywin might have been a little bit more like that in the few years after Joanna died, but when we saw Tywin, it was 2 decades after she died.
He had new priorities and had
learned to take care of himself at that point. But Otto maybe hasn't completely learned that lesson.
But it is around, but it is a similar situation. You're right, especially he has a son and a daughter, and like the books, his children are a little different, but it is similar. You're right. Tywin is a great comparison. Maybe Tywin mashed up with maybe Littlefinger or something like that. We'll see though. We'll see how the portrayal goes. Let's move on to the tournament. The tournament was pretty electric. It was a step up in terms of production values from the tournaments in a song in Game of Thrones the first time through, certainly compared to the early tournament with Gregor and Sir Loras and Sandor and Jaime. But it had some similar vibes as well. It's a lot of it is shown from the perspective of some young girls watching, where you have Sansa was sort of our main POV for a lot of the tournament, sitting next to Ned with Littlefinger nearby, it's whispering in her ear. So this is a similar kind of, but very different at the same time as that. So there's a lot of great houses represented here. We haven't had time to fully pick them all out from the crowd, but boy, the heraldry and the setup, just awesome. Just woo, fires you up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've been scrolling through some of the heraldry here, and we see some Lannisters fighting, some Starks, Baratheons, Tarleys. We see a lot of Tullys. We see a lot of heraldry that we recognize. Do you think that these are lesser? I'll go to, for example, we have a shot of a Stark who very clearly gets killed.
Yeah, that dude probably didn't live. His face being exploded like that.
We have a Lannister, someone with a Lannister shield that gets got, and we have this Stark. Is it just a lesser cousin, you think? I think it's okay. So let's comment on the brutality and the extreme violence of this scene. It may seem a little out of place, but the more I thought about it, the more it works for me. Rhaenys explains it quite well to start off with. While this is happening, it's interspersed, and that's something this episode does a lot of, interspersing scenes. It does it really well. This is probably the first time in the episode it happens. So at first it's interspersed with Rhaenys' conversation, and then it moves on to being interspersed with the birth, right? So the first part is this Rhaenys' explanation of why the realm is so violent. Part of it is she points out that the realm has been ruled in peace for 70 years. Now, while peace is good, you still have to manage peace properly, or the simmering violence percolates up through in this peace and blows up eventually. And she's saying that's what's happening. These men, it's been so long since they've seen a battle, because there hasn't been real battles in Westeros for quite a while. They've forgotten what it's like. It's like Catelyn's speech to Brienne about the Knights of Summer, about they're all green. They don't know what... They're all excited for the glory of war. They don't know what they're talking about. If they knew what war was like, they wouldn't be so excited. And it's also the sign of this mismanagement, of not keeping the lords from fighting each other. The reason you got to keep them from fighting each other is, a Stark, a Lannister, they're killed. That could potentially ignite a blood feud. And they're just letting it happen. They don't care. They don't realize. It's not that they don't care necessarily. It's they don't realize the danger. They don't realize what that could lead to. And it's on one hand, it's like, wow, this is really violent. Can they really get away with this? Yeah, they can. They can until they can't.
They can until they can't. Gregor nearly killed Loras in the first tournament in Game of Thrones. He got away with it partly because he didn't actually kill anyone. I mean, he did kill Sir Hugh, but that was played off as an accident. If he had actually hurt Sir Loras, he may have had to answer for that. But Robert still didn't. He's just like, let him go. Just let him go. No punishment to Sir Gregor for that, right? So it's not like this isn't the first time we've seen something like that. This is more extreme, but it's similar.
It did irk me a little as I was watching this scene. I felt like these guys getting killed in a tournament, even the fact that there's maybe some little details and exceptions to Daemon or whatever, but like Kristen Cole using like a ball and chain.
Yeah,
it's
Morning
like
Star, yeah.
That Westman is like a balance, like you're giving up certain values of a sword for the deadliness.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You lose some maneuverability and some defense because it's so deadly if you hit. How is that a tournament weapon? Right? Like
Damon's using his Valyrian steel blade. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And so then people were getting killed and I was a little irked and I felt like it was an unreal presentation. But then I started to realize it's not the show making a mistake. It's the people running the tournament making a mistake. Yeah. And that they were risking starting a war. And it just kind of got lucky. Similar in the tournament, in the Game of Thrones tournament, a war could, if Gregor had killed Loras, the course of events from that point on might have been very,
and
very
what did Varys tell Ned to do? Varys told Ned to get Loras Tyrell on your side, given what just happened. And he didn't. Instead, he said, he's like, send Loras to go attack Gregor after what happened. He's like, no, I'm going to send Beric Dondarrion because he's a nobody, you know? And he's like, no, you send Loras. Like, that'll get the Tyrells on your side, man. Like, play the politics. You got a golden rose opportunity here, but he didn't take it. And yeah, you're right. This is just, they're not playing the politics. Like, he's like, he won't deign to get his hands dirty, but you really should have.
Yeah. And a lot of times those political maneuverings get cast as shadiness, you know, characters' ulterior motives. Often they do have ulterior motives and they are shady. But also sometimes those political maneuverings stop wars from happening.
Yes.
You know, if even if your ulterior motive is to like get your brother on the throne or to make more money off the crops, still, if you stop a war from happening, fine. You can get more money from the crops if it saves thousands of people from dying.
Absolutely. And as well, this is fairly supported in Fire and Blood. The histories tell us that in the final moments of the duel, Criston Cole knocked Dark Sister from Daemon Targaryen's hand with his Morningstar. I've always wondered about that. Like, why were they fighting with real weapons? I've been wondering about that since Fire and Blood came out. Or actually, I think that was in the World of Ice and Fire as well. So I've been wondering about that since 2014. So they were like, yep, that's what happened. So they just built on that. Like, yeah, this was just a particularly violent tournament because of the build-up, because all these violent people came here to be violent. They haven't had a real war, and they want to do that, and they don't know what they're getting into. So I think it fits quite well. So like you, I was a little jarred by it at first, but thinking about it made it fit quite well.
Yeah, you know.
Good setup.
Also, they outjarred us with something else.
Yeah, so. That's true.
I'll say we saw the first episode in George's cinema in the John Cocteau Theater, and so the sound was really good, and the tourney scene was so was so visceral. Was just like the clanging of the hooves, the ringing, like when Viserys later talks about his prophecies, we'll get into, and he talks about like, oh, I heard the ringing of shields and the clanging of hooves and the swords. I was like, we did too. Yeah. Like they really emphasized the sound there.
Very true.
I think they're making an active point to do that. I wanted to say earlier, I want to give a lot of credit to some of the filmmaking aspects, in addition to the acting and this incredibly rich story we got to work with. The editing is really good. Mm-hmm. Like you said, like not only the tournament, but several other moments. This sort of the segues. We're hearing a conversation from one scene while we're witnessing another one, and it kind of converged.
I liked that GoPro,
it was really well done.
The POV style I have on the screen right now, where you were like
the jousting GoPro,
jousting with them.
That was awesome. Yeah. I like the little detail too, how his lance is a fist at the end.
Yeah,
instead of because of course they're not using spikes to,
I really, I think
I wouldn't have been surprised if someone did.
One of my favorite things about the episode probably was just how good the armor was.
Yeah,
and specifically like how much there was meaning to the armor. As you can see on the screen, Criston Cole, his armor was plain as could be. He was the only one in this lineup here that didn't have a plume on his head. As you see, like we've got all these Corbreys and Malisters and Hightowers and just really fancy armored people, and then Criston Cole.
And you got to really think,
which makes sense, right? Yeah. He's got no family, he's got no arms or whatever. It's very fitting, and I appreciate they had that detail.
And arguably, it's worse for him. You think that he's probably overcome a lot of prejudice. Alicent knows, he's Dornish, but he's from a Stormlands house. Stormlands people don't get along with Dornish, and vice versa. So this is one of those love connections. This marriage, or his parents were a couple that normally would be taboo in a lot of circles. So. Double whammy for him, but he's a badass and he's good looking, so that's part of how he overcomes it.
So yeah, Alicent might have been a little bit racist when she said that, but I think more so she was expecting a Stormlandser, and so she was more so surprised to see a Dornishman at all, especially because remember, Dorne is not part of the realm right now. They are not part of the Seven Kingdoms.
They're still independent, yeah. So that's very important too. So it's even more taboo maybe that, because they're not even from the same kingdom. Not only are they from regions that are historically at war, but yeah, they're not even in the same kingdom at this point. So that's a pretty big deal, and is a good setup for him going forward to see what's going to happen with him. And of course, Alicent is from Old Town, which they're predisposed against the Dornish too. The Reachmen in general and Stormlanders tend to be a bit prejudiced against Dornish, and vice versa, to be fair. Well, let's move on. Any other comments on the tournament? I guess one of my few complaints is they just can't help themselves with the open face helmets, but that's just a recurring thing of all TV with war in it. People just don't wear full helmets, and
they had a lot of closed helmets though.
Most of them were closed.
You're
closed.
Right. I thought it was pretty good.
That was
they
fine.
were better than normal.
Yeah, it was better than normal. It was still better than most scenes like this on other TV shows. Not to mention the action, which was as good as it gets.
Do you have a favorite set of armor from the set?
Ooh.
Like,
I need to get a better look at them, but man, the Hightower, that castle armor was super cool.
Like, I know that probably the natural answer for most people is going to be Daemon's armor, which was badass, but I was so surprised to see that Hightower armor, so I think that was mine as well.
You know what? I think Daemon's armor was cooler, but I like the Hightower helmet more. The winged helmet is kind of cool to me. Maybe if it had a full visor, I would like it more. If it had like a dragon, if it had like a whole, it's not a complete
From
helmet.
a practical standpoint, it wasn't very good, but it is striking. He stands out from everyone, which is part of his goal.
And he could be just like flaunting it. He's like, I'm taking this extra risk because this is who I am. That might be part of the explanation.
So I have a thought sort of about the tournament. What are we going to segue to next?
The childbirth.
Okay, then my thought will help that segue. In the After the Thrones, what's a little like
inside the
behind
episode,
the scenes bit?
Inside the
episode. One thing they said in there that really stuck with me, and it affected I think I've watched it 3 times at this point. He said that they wanted to show what they wanted to demonstrate what this show was capable of. Mm-hmm. They wanted to use this first episode to demonstrate what the show was capable of. And that means a lot of things. One is the amount of action that they can have, which they did with the tournament, but also the level of tragedy and violence. On a lot of levels, I kept thinking about that statement that he made.
That's a great point.
For better or worse, I think they did it.
Yeah, this won't be. Go ahead, Jay.
Oh, I was gonna say I really appreciated watching the episode with our roommate's girlfriend, who is completely unsullied, doesn't really know Game of Thrones even very well.
Yeah, she hadn't even seen the first show.
Yeah, so she really was very unsullied, and I'm happy to report that she cried twice in the first episode of this show. She cried tears of sadness at Aemma's death and at the cremation. She did cry tears of joy at the end when Rhaenyra was named heir. It really got to her.
And she watched it again, right?
Yeah,
after.
she immediately rewatched it.
She did skip the birthing the second time.
So that's one casual fan who's sold.
But so we'll set that up with Aemma Arryn here. She has this great speech to her daughter about how you have a royal womb, they're going to make you have kids, period. Like it's society, this is all of society's weight put on you. You're not going to get away from that. And she's right. She's not going to get away from that. But it prepares her for that. She's like, look, whatever you want to do, you're in this role. Just like your father didn't really want to be king, battlefields for men. This is our battlefield. And then those two things are intercut. The battlefield where these guys are, maybe they shouldn't be fighting, but they are. And here we have a pregnancy that Aemma probably shouldn't have had. She probably shouldn't have been put into this position to have another child.
She didn't really want it either.
She didn't really want it. You're right. She didn't want it. She knew it was her duty, so she went along with it. And it's not just her husband pushing her into it, but he's one of the main ones, if not the main one. The pressure to have an heir is really strong. Clearly, it's stated that he's wanted a son ever since they got married. He's been wanting that forever.
Anyone else pressuring her, he could have snuffed that out if he
Yes,
wanted to.
that's true.
Yeah.
So
he might not have been the only one, but he was the only one that mattered.
So it's a really powerful scene. I think universally it was received that way. I haven't seen too many people say it was gratuitous, although apparently it may have been before it was cut down. The original version of this and before it was released to the public was apparently a little more gruesome. But let's discuss what happened here, because I think there's some confusion. The Maester says it's a difficult or impossible choice. It's maybe not clear, but Aemma was going to die no matter what. And I think a lot of people miss that, and it causes people to have a much dimmer view of Viserys. That said, there's still a lot to criticize Viserys for here. A lot. But it's not that he chose for her to die. That would be perhaps irredeemable, but he didn't choose that. And the inside the episode afterwards makes that 100% clear. She was definitely going to die no matter what. I mean, according to the Maester. So Viserys doesn't know, like, maybe the Maester is lying, but Viserys can't push back against the scientific consensus here.
But no, where the issue comes is that he did not tell Aemma. They did not get her consent. They did not give her a heads up. They held her down and forcibly did this to her.
Yes, that's where it was wrong. He should have.
They didn't give her the choice. No. That's my biggest complaint.
Yeah. She would have chosen. She would have chosen to die for her child.
Let her be the one to choose. She should be the one to choose from every angle you take.
Let her go out bravely instead of So that is
like literally, even if she would have chosen to die and the kid with her instead of. She still should have been allowed to make that choice.
I agree.
So an interesting thing here, and we'll get into this more in our Saturday episode that gets into book spoilers, but just this is a reference to very similar to the story of Alyssa Velaryon. That's Jaehaerys' mother and Rhaenys' grandmother, okay? She was given a C-section when she was giving birth to Rhaenys' mother, Jocelyn Baratheon. The story is that she may have given her consent or she may not. The sources differ. And so clearly they took inspiration from that story for Aemma Arryn, and she did not give her consent, though.
And that was also a woman who should not have gotten pregnant. Like, her husband should not have impregnated her. She was too weak from her previous... Think of Elia Martell, who they said couldn't have another child, with Rhaegar. And it's part of why Rhaegar went and hooked up with Lyanna. I mean, there's obviously a lot more going on there, but Elia could not have a third child, and Rhaegar wasn't as much of a jerk as some of these other ones. Were like, you can handle it, So at least not about that much. So it's definitely, there's some understanding here in the scene that may not be entirely clear.
In fact, Aemma's own mother died in childbirth, Daela Targaryen, but on the other end of the spectrum, she was very young. She was 18. She was a little too, young.
She was a very delicate person.
Yeah, she was a delicate woman. Because obviously that's not super young, 18 in general.
So yeah, Aemma's, that's her Targaryen mother, to be clear, yeah.
She's an Arryn, right?
Yeah. Her father was Roderick Arryn, her mother was Daela Targaryen.
Jaehaerys' daughter. So
I don't know. I don't want to jump on too much of a tangent, but that I wonder if that's a connect, because isn't Daemon's wife from the Vale?
Yeah.
And the Arryns are from the Vale. I'm sure there's some sort of some attempt of diplomacy to get those marriages set up.
Right, yes.
Absolutely.
The Runestone is basically the second most powerful house in the Vale, and the Arryns were the number one. So it was like the first son to the most powerful, second son to the second most powerful. But he doesn't have any kids with Rhea Royce. That's important.
Mm-hmm. But yeah,
another little... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say about this scene, I want to say that I'm very pro this scene. This childbirth scene. I normally, if anyone who listens to our show knows that I kind of hate the Dead Mothers Club, as it's called in the fandom, which is this trope of there being dead mothers. But I think they did it very well to actually give Aemma a plot line, a character, an arc. So, like, she had fear. She was a real character, and I think that goes a long way with me personally feeling comfortable or feeling like it did justice.
She was not fridged.
Yeah, she was not fridged. Exactly.
If you haven't heard the term fridging, it's when you kill a character off right away to facilitate another character's plot line, and it's usually a woman being killed for a man's plot line. Sometimes it's like their whole family is killed.
This is for the pain of the series, but it's also for the pain of Rhaenyra and the pain of the realm itself. Like, Aemma's loss is going to be felt, throughout this whole season. Like, it had great significance.
And her lesson is going to be throughout the whole season, because there's going to be a lot more kids born. I don't know that we're going to have a lot more birthing scenes. I don't know that we need a lot more of them, but there'll probably be at least one more, and there'll be a lot more kids born. That's set up like her mother tells her, you're going to have kids, and Alicent will have kids too. There's a lot of kids coming.
I will say, if I had one criticism of this scene, it would be that we are very clearly in Viserys' perspective for this scene. We're seeing it from his eyes. I think that it would have been a stronger choice to see it from Aemma's perspective. And I think they could have done that with camera angles, with showing us, like, from her perspective being pulled down. And maybe that would have been too intense and too visceral, and maybe they tried it. But I think that I only would have liked to be more in Aemma's shoes in this scenario than in Viserys.
Well, given that there's more coming, maybe we will. Maybe with Rhaenyra or Alicent,
with someone else who gives childbirth, maybe we'll be now in their shoes and seeing it from their perspective. I think that would be a strong choice.
Yeah, I agree.
I have the whole ball of thoughts around this. One, I think I agree. I thought about that too, the idea of we saw it from Emma's perspective, and we didn't actually hear Melos and Viserys talking, making
they're just like whispering, and she's just like kind of
whispering, and then came, and he's like, I love you, and they pull her down. But I think that would have been too horrific. Like, as tough as it was to watch, that might have been. Yeah. I don't know. I can't imagine putting myself in a woman's shoes watching this as it is. But
a lot of men needed to see that, probably, like we just like, if you don't have a kid, I don't have a kid, I don't know what this is like. It's terrifying. Like, and it's realistic in a lot of ways, not fully, and it's not modern, but it's happened. Like, real situations like this have happened throughout history.
Yeah, I will say I have heard from different women that I'm friends with or know who have who've been pregnant, who've given birth, who are like, that was visceral, traumatic, triggering, but good, accurate, real. I appreciate that they did it. I haven't seen, I've from the people I know who've given birth, I've seen positive reactions to this.
Yeah. Right on. That's good. Well, good job, showrunners, for making an authentic birthing scene that mothers have signed off on. That's great.
I wanted to say also that I don't believe the intent of the showrunners was to make Viserys seem more villainous with this scene. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's their intent, but I think it's going to happen.
I also agree.
And, yeah, I think a lot of people were going to think of him as having done, and it is also worth noting whatever the intent of the showrunners was, that it still is like his instinct is still. Like, I try to give maybe him some credit that this is like the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
Like, it's happening right now. He doesn't know about medicine. His advisors are telling him, you have to decide now. She's going to die. Like, I can see him like, but I still think it's noteworthy that his instinct wasn't ask her what she thinks.
Yeah.
Tell her and let her.
It's
his
disrespectful.
Instinct was,
yeah, it is.
I have to do this. I have to make this decision.
Yeah.
Even if he has some noble idea of keeping a realm safe because he needs a male heir, he still doesn't occur to him to let the woman choose.
Yeah, he didn't have enough faith in her, and I think he would. Yeah, he should have trusted her more.
One other little detail I wanted to point out going back, that I being unsullied, I didn't know this was going to happen. But I kind of started to be suspicious because there's one conversation. She was already talking about the toughness of the childbirth, and she's in that bath. And he says in his dream that the baby comes out wearing a crown.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, I don't need that.
And I'm like, ooh.
Yeah.
And she's like, that doesn't sound good. And I'm like, I don't think this birth is going to go well.
Yeah, it was meant to be a joke, but you're right.
It's going to be as bad as it was. But.
Yeah, and especially because your crown is like, that's the first thing, your baby is crowning. That's like the phrase when their head starts to come out.
Yeah.
It's
this idea of like, it's extra large with sharp edges and jewels and no.
So let's talk about that, because the dream is part of his motivation here. Absolutely. Like dreams are a huge part of the Targaryen family. After all, we find out later Aegon's dream is a huge part of how he operates in general and how prior Targaryens of kings have operated, and queens apparently as well. But Daenerys the Dreamer's dream saved their whole family from the doom. So this is a family that has a very good reason to take their dreams very seriously. So thundering hooves, splintering shields, ringing swords, all that happened. The dragons roared as one. That did not happen necessarily. Arguably, the dragons roared separately. Daemon roared his victory. Syrax roared at the funeral, and Caraxes roared when leaving. Those weren't as one. Maybe the roaring as one is the funeral when they were all mourning together. But another interpretation is that this dream has not yet been fulfilled, that it's yet to happen. So
another line in there was the bells of the sept tolled.
Which may have been like the morning bells or whatever, which
I assume that did happen.
I don't remember that actually happening, but it would have. They would have definitely tolled the bells for the queen and the child, no doubt. And he placed his heir on the Iron Throne, which technically he was heir for a minute, so that did that
heir for a day, yeah.
And then, but then he, so it was not entirely fulfilled, arguably. So I kind of lean towards the dream is yet to be fully fulfilled. What do you think there?
I think it's at least mostly fulfilled, but also just the nature of prophecies that there's a blur. It's hard to know exactly what it means. It can mean multiple things. And like even in his dream, think about how we witnessed that scene. It was kind of interspliced with the birth in a tournament. His dream might be similar interspliced with his son's birth and Dany's birth or something. You can see a lot of ways for it to be a mesh of visions that aren't quite properly perceived in the first place, much less interpreted after the fact.
Right on. Okay. So we'll have more to say about dreams later. The dreams will be a in and out topic throughout the season, I would think, and certainly more in this episode. Let's take a little mid-roll segue here. Couple of questions and love from y'all. We got shout out from Rebecca Bellick, Rebea Lady of Waves. Thanks for that, Rebecca. Just want to send some love via super chat. So happy to be back, baby. She says, so are we. The hype is real. We are in it now, folks. We're having some great times with so much more to come. We're just getting started. It's a good time to be us. Bosmain says, after Jaehaerys announced the choice for king from the council scene, it seemed like he was disappointed with the choice. Did he want Rhaenys instead? We sort of referred to that at the beginning, how he seemed a little chagrined. Like,
You know, I like the idea that Jaehaerys would have had a front runner. Like, he would have had someone that he kind of wanted more than anyone else. He might have thought Viserys will be best for the realm because there won't be issues of succession, but he might have secretly been like, Rhaenys is my favorite granddaughter. I wish it was her.
Yeah, and we see from like the tourney scene, the way she seems to break down what's happening. She seems to have a greater understanding of what's going on. It kind of implies that she is smarter about what's happening, and she would have ruled things differently. Like, if I was in charge, this tournament wouldn't be so out of hand. It's kind of the implication, especially with her very serious husband at her side, who's also seems to be on top of things and taking things seriously. So those two, you could see, like, they seem more competent.
Yeah, I have to wonder if the vote also was, when they voted for Viserys, they were voting for a Targaryen married to a half Targaryen, so it was doubly relevant. And they would have been voting for a woman who's married to a black man.
Yeah.
So I have to wonder if they were already not favored to win for a few other reasons beyond even her own gender, right?
Yeah, I wonder about that. I wonder if there's any...
Does Corlys face... I guess that would be the question. Do Corlys and the Velaryons face any racism in Westeros for their skin color?
Yeah, for now I'd assume that maybe only a little. It certainly wouldn't be anything like, say, American racism.
Yeah,
but,
I don't think they would be as. I don't think people would be as racist to them as they would be to Kristen Cole, to the Dornish.
I agree. It's much
but I think there will
worse to be Dornish.
But I think there would be some.
Yeah,
I do.
And they may have some fear about how powerful he was, because Corlys was the richest man in Westeros. So people might not want him in charge, like specifically because he's so powerful. They might want to keep him in check.
And they might want Viserys in charge because if they think they can manipulate him.
Absolutely.
He's less likely to push things on them.
Boom.
And,
So I think you're right. I sort of interpreted that disappointment from Jaehaerys as well. I wasn't sure if it was just him being tired or not, and it's hard to say, but I felt a little of that too.
It was also another comment made in the After the Thrones. What was it called again?
Inside the episode.
Inside the episode.
Inside the episode. I always want to think it's like After the Thrones or some like clever name, but after the episode. Anyway, he said in there, it was something that like shifted a gear in my brain, that Viserys didn't ask for this, right? Yeah. He didn't expect to be king. He didn't want to be king.
He didn't push for it. Yeah.
Like I said, he seems to be accepting the responsibility, but he doesn't seem to. It seems like he got it more for political and reasons of appearance or whatever, rather than his ability as a leader.
Mm-hmm. Whereas Corlys apparently was going around bribing people to try and make sure Rhaenys happened, but it didn't.
Interesting. I was about to say that on some level that might be better. Like, if the choice is between a leader who is certainly going to start a war or starve the people, and a great leader, right? Or if the choice is between someone who might be a great leader but might start a civil war just because of who they are, I could see why you might like the pros and cons of the great leader versus the perception of the role of the leader might stop a war or something.
Yeah,
from happening,
absolutely. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So so that's a real balance. Might be why Jaehaerys called the council in the first place, because he's like, well, I can see downsides to either of these. I want to just see, this way we get people to swear, and they're more bought in on the choice, rather than him just naming an heir, which may not go well, because he doesn't have the vibe of the realm at this point, doesn't know who will be more supported. So he's like, well, let's just call a vote. And that way, and it kind of worked out that it was overwhelming, because that's a good thing in terms of like outlook. You're like, okay, if it was close, there might be a war over it later, but...
Yeah, you might think that you could win people to your side if it's close, and overwhelm, but if it's a by and far, like I guess I kind of have to go along.
Yeah, the losing side isn't going to be like, oh, we were so close when they lose like by that much. The vote is that out of whack. They're not like, well, we should, okay, we got to give up here. There's just not enough support for us. So it makes things more clear where everyone stands. So it's kind of an interesting message that the whole council send. JC says, why is Daemon so needy for his brother's approval? Where does that come from? I think that's a standard younger brother, older brother relationship. I think it's very common amongst
there's more
brothers
to it.
And sisters. There probably is more to it, but I think
it's because they lost their father and mother. I think that it's because they're orphans. I think that it's going to be more. It's going to come out even more than normal.
That is a great point. You're right. That's probably very strong, because their father was Balon. That's partly why he named this heir for a day was named Balon, because that's their father's name. And yeah, he died young. He did die pretty young. He was hand to the king, and he died of like an ulcer, stomach ulcer. It's not entirely sure, but it was almost certainly not foul play. He just a really unlucky, like Dark Ages medieval infection that would have been cured in modern times pretty easily, especially someone of his wealth. But in that day, there was no, you'd have to cut you open to solve that problem, and they don't do that on a whim, like, let's not cut you open.
I'm really glad this came up because I'm a huge fan of Better Call Saul, and there's a similar brotherly rivalry in that show where at different points each brother has supported or worked against the other.
There's like a law-abiding brother versus wild brother dynamic,
the law-breaking, get away with stuff, but still has a good streak.
And a lot of people get hurt in the wake of their conflict with each other.
Yeah.
I can't stop seeing all the parallels between them.
It's pretty good. Yeah, there's worse comparisons to be made for sure. I like that one a lot. Let's talk a little bit about themes and patterns. One of my favorites that we noticed here is the physical manifestation of stress, which is a very human way to portray things. I really like this. There's several examples of it. Viserys' back sore. It says it was given to him by the Iron Throne. He leaned on it funny, then it festered. Very symbolic, as I said before. Not attending to things properly, letting them get out of hand, letting them get worse because he just is a little lazy, would rather be doing other stuff, maybe lazy is not the right word. But compare that to Daemon's resorting to heavy-handedness with the city's crime. Like, he has to cauterize this festering wound of crime in the city because he let it get so bad that they're like, you shouldn't have handled it that way. You shouldn't go out there chopping hands off and cutting off penises and stuff like that. And they're like, and maybe they're right. They probably are right. But on the other hand, they have not looked at the problem. They don't know how bad it's got. And when Daemon says it's gotten so bad that I had to do this, who's to say he's wrong? I mean, he might very well be exaggerating. I suspect he is exaggerating a bit. But they didn't check. They just assume he's going too far, and none of them are looking at the problem. They're just like, we don't like how you're handling this problem that we haven't checked into at all on ourselves. So it's kind of like, how can you quibble with the solution when you haven't even looked at the problem? Well, because it's so damn violent. But on the other hand, they still haven't looked at it.
I've got a few thoughts on this, but I feel it's more connected to other things we're going to talk about. If you were going through like the stress,
I want to go through. Let's keep it with the stress stuff there. So we'll come back to that. But so this is a thing with Viserys, and then later he cuts his hand on the throne while arguing with Daemon, and that's very symbolic because it's blood on the throne right when he changes the name of his heir. So that's just standard symbolism for blood is coming.
And the danger of the throne, the sacrifices you have to make, the blood that gets shed,
absolutely.
Even when it's not war necessarily, maybe.
And Viserys cutting himself multiple times is a recurring theme that he's not fit to sit the throne. That's been suggested in the original source material as well. Alicent bites her fingernails and has like torn up cuticles. Very great detail, a little uncomfortable, but I get it. That's one I have. I acquired that from my mother. My mother had this habit, and I had that problem when I was younger. And it's a very realistic way for anxiety to play out.
Someone said it in the chat, but it's true. We also the same dynamic we see with Daemon and Viserys, Chuck, Jimmy. We kind of see here with Alicent, Rhaenyra, the rule breaker and the law abider. And the little nerd.
Chuck
Alicent.
had his
the adventure seeker and the book reader.
It's a dynamic that is popular, so it makes sense to see it come up multiple places.
And Daemon himself isn't immune to it. He had trouble. He couldn't finish with Mazari. He was having sex with her, and he just couldn't. He just stopped because he was stressed out or angry or all of the above. And that's pretty interesting. It gave him even more care. Like, he's clearly not just some sociopath if he's just after his own pleasure and he's distracted by these other things. It's not a situation you can necessarily put yourself in. You can't sympathize with being the heir and having all this wealth and all this other stuff. These aren't normal human problems, but being so wrapped up about something in your head, having such a big problem with things going on in your life that it has a physical manifestation. That's very realistic and very something you can all latch onto as a common person.
There could easily be sort of a loop, and it makes more sense even for it to be. But I was wondering if he was overcompensating, if he had some sort of erectile dysfunction, and he was overcompensating with violence and being mad at his brother and stuff like that. Yeah. But maybe the violence, his role with his brother, is affecting his sexual performance, and maybe they feed each other and make each other worse. I don't know.
Yeah, it was a super interesting choice for them to make there because, yeah, it's like they're trying to show this like very highly masculine guy and he's got his, his position, he's got his dragon and his sword and he's this badass. But yeah, he's having trouble in the bedroom. Like that's,
It just occurred to me how insulting he was to his wife. That might also be overcompensation.
Ooh, good point. Yeah, he's like, maybe he just can't perform with her.
Maybe, yeah.
And so, but he's blaming her for it.
So
no, it's because she's
bad
ugly
about her, but really it's
no, man, it's on you, bro. your dark sister can't stand straight. And Rhaenyra as well. The physical manifestation of her anxiety and nervousness is extremely well done when she's in the final scene when she's being made queen, or the heir rather. She's shaking and breathing heavily, like she's breathing really fast. Her face is flushed. She has to like fix her posture because she realizes she's slumping. It's very well done. And not only and it comes right after her father gives her all these grave secrets. Like, not only is it a big deal to be queen, but it's the most dangerous seat in the world. And by the way, a Song of Ice and Fire. So she has this massive weight dropped on her, which she was not prepared for because she goes her whole life expecting to be replaced. She's like, yeah, she doesn't like the idea. And she, as Alicent points out, she's refuses to admit just how much it bothers her, but she still expects it. She's still expected to be replaced. And then all of a sudden, no, you're the heir. And she wasn't raised that way. She wasn't taught for these. She wasn't brought to council meetings. She was as a cupbearer, but she wasn't being raised to rule. You know what I mean? It's a big difference. It's like Robb was always by Ned's side, being prepared to rule, whereas Rhaenyra not.
By the way, not just them being personally prepared, but everyone around them being prepared to accept them as the heir.
Yeah.
That's also as important.
Yeah, and she's worried about that.
And also her in this new role, like in this most dangerous seat in the realm, and also with this burden of this dream being passed on as prophecy to fulfill, it didn't take away her obligation to have a kid.
It arguably increases it. Yeah.
Also. Yeah. Yeah. So.
And she just saw her mother die doing it, and her mother's mother died doing it. So like, that's terrifying.
And it's been made clear to her that the sexism that she'll face along the way, like it's on and on. It's like it's unbearable.
The level of pressure.
Imagine
no wonder her mind. No wonder she's anxious, and the portrayal is of her breathing heavily and all that. Yeah, like how could you even? Yeah, you're right. It's like I couldn't possibly imagine what she's going through. Let's talk about a little more about that scene. That's a segue to the coronation.
By the way, there's even one more little thing that's going on in her brain that I want to go ahead and mention now. I'm not sure where it's going to fit elsewhere, but she seems to respect, if not idolize, her uncle Daemon, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's
a little bit,
two different times. She's kind of exposed to him not being so good, right? She was in a council room when they were talking about what what he had done, and that with the city watching everything. There's got to be a little piece of her being like, really?
She heard the hair for a day thing.
Hair for a day, yeah.
Oh, she reacted to that. The camera went to her.
I think she reacted more so to the fact she's like, oh, like he's going to be in trouble for that, more so than maybe her being like, oh, that was a terrible thing for him to do. I think her mind was spinning off of what the ramifications of that, the implications of that were. Yeah, exactly. I think that
one way or the other is just one other burden, one other gear in her brain she's got to account for in a mess of everything else.
Yeah, and she's a teenager who just likes flying and hanging out with Alicent, and wants cake. She loves cake.
Eating cake.
Yeah. I know. What a setup.
She said lemon cake.
Yeah. So it's like Daemon's food cake, So the coronation scene, there's some little subtle moments besides what we've described already here. You've got Boromir Baratheon, who pauses before kneeling, and he looks a little like he's unhappy about this. And there's a couple of ways to interpret this. One, the most straightforward, I think, which I'm not sure is accurate, but one is that he just doesn't want to kneel to a woman. But I don't know that that's it. Because he was happy to kneel and get the favor of Rhaenys, the queen who never was, who in book canon is
his niece.
But here they're saying cousin, so I don't know if there's a small change.
Either they've changed it or they just call each other cousin because it's easier to call someone that sometimes.
Yeah, and Sir Harold Westerling also tells Rhaenyra that whoever this Cole guy is, he just beat both the Tarly boys, or Tarly lads. He says lads. And Baratheon lads. And we only saw him beat one Baratheon lad and one Tarly lad. So the other one presumably happened off screen. They're just implying, well, he beat 2 Baratheons and a Tarly. So there is more Baratheons that we don't see, and that fills it out a bit. Either way, so yeah, Rhaenys is his kin. So he's thinking, well, if this woman's going to be queen, why wasn't, he's like a little sour that his family didn't get it. So that's, to me, that's more likely, but it could be both. He doesn't want to follow a teenage girl, but
that makes sense to me, by the way. I do remember thinking in that moment that it was an awkward pause, but my mind didn't follow through on why that was. But now it makes sense.
Glad you noticed it, yeah, because that it shows that they were aiming for that. Because we already knew, like, seeing it, like, oh, he's upset, and then
I wondered if, like, was there some history? Did they have a relationship? I guess they have a familial relationship, but the history is that he felt like this woman in the past should have been in charge and she wasn't, and so now this new woman is being put in charge, and I could see it takes a minute for him to process that, and maybe in its grand scheme of things it's progress. I guess it's good. It doesn't make sense for them to backtrack to her at this point. That would have been more troublesome, or
so we see Hobart Hightower
to incite conflict.
We see Hobart Hightower, Corlys Velaryon, a lot of others unseen.
We see a Stark.
And we see a Stark, particularly important because we see this scene is intercut with the Song of Ice and Fire reveal, which is another excellent combination of scenes happening together. And when he describes the part of Aegon's dream that describes the cold winter coming out of the north, we have Lord Stark pledging to Rhaenyra. It's really nicely done. It's right when the Stark is named is when he's talking about the cold north, the winter, the darkness, this force that's going to come at some point in the future. Super nicely done there. Nice parallels, mirroring, whatever you want to call it. Love that so much.
And yeah, you'll note this says a silver-haired, gray-haired Stark. That's because this will not be the Stark that's relevant going forward.
Yeah. This dude's going to die. His son's going to be the relevant one. This is Rickon. It's going to be his son Cregan that will matter. So, in fact, this guy's going to die pretty soon, and if they follow book canon, Uncle Bernard is going to take over, and Cregan will have to fight his way to reclaim his rights, because Bernard's going to be like the regent.
And I guess one of those Starks just died at the tourney, too.
That was probably Bernard's son. I bet that was one of Bernard's kids.
Something like that.
Do we know anything about casting? Is Cregan Stark or Bernard Stark?
It'll be a season 2.
It'll be season 2.
That's kind of why they have this. They can show us these people who are going to die, and then recast it. I thought it was really smart what they did at the tourney with, like, they showed Gwaine Hightower just in a helmet, for example, so that they don't necessarily have to cast people until they actually need to use them. The helms kind of worked out for them in that front.
We know from the rehearsal with Nathan Fielder, they save a lot of money by not having him speak lines.
That's right. Yeah, he's an extra. He just goes, points his lance, and he's like, ouch. You can't even say ouch. It's like, oh, just bleed and breathe heavily.
They can clap. They
can clap or bang their lance on the ground. Yeah.
But yeah, we saw that Hobart Hightower too. He also won't be very relevant going forward. Another, these again. We're going to have some big time jumps going forward here.
Yeah, so they have a little more room to play. And of course, there's characters like, as we've seen in the real world and in Game of Thrones, a lot of times the name of a kid is their grandfather or great-grandfather's name. At least families have these traditional names they reuse a lot. And of course, according to the showrunners, they aren't going to be too shy about keeping those in place. They're going to assume we're smart enough to figure all that out rather than changing it to make it simpler. So, well, you're a listener of History of Westeros. You're probably more on the advanced side of things anyway. The names don't bother you. In fact, you probably prefer they keep the canon names. We certainly do. So even though it's more of a challenge.
You'll become more advanced.
That's true.
You'll become more advanced by listening to History of Westeros. I know I have.
Certainly, that is the goal. Let's talk about some of the individual characters. Getting a little deeper into who they are, setting them up a little more, fleshing them out a little more. And then we'll move on to our final couple of sections here. We're still going to talk about some callbacks and references, some lore and history, and then we'll do our favorite moments as part of our outro, and then that will be it. Okay. Characters. There's multiple examples we've seen of actors given more freedom to develop the personality of their character. This is a function, I think, of the open-ended nature of the source material. Fire and Blood a lot of times promotes up to 3 versions of certain events, and the reader's left to sort of interpret, sort out what may have happened. The show is going to have to be a little more specific with some of these things, but it also is able to give you that uncertainty in some places. For example, with the heir for a day scene. We never actually see Daemon say heir for a day. He's confronted with it, and he doesn't deny it, but we don't actually see him say it, so we don't get to see how he says it, right? Was he gleeful? Was he somber?
Yeah, we see Mazzaria was in a celebratory mood, but I don't think that Daemon really was. I think he was trying to distract himself from his own stress, like we were talking about.
This is something we're going to ask Ryan Condal about, because I think it's really unique. You don't see a lot of actors and given this much leeway to decide their own characterization of their role they're playing. So we've got several examples from casting notes about, like, for example, Matt Smith, apparently it was his idea to add more emotion to the funeral scene from his perspective, for him to be the one that steps up and, was the mature one there. And we were told that Alicent, the actress playing Alicent, Emily Carey, she journaled in character offset and in between scenes to develop herself a little more and to get more in character, which I think is awesome. And I just wonder what other things that are maybe a little bit new from behind the scenes that they're doing for the show that seems pretty interesting, because usually they're given lines and not that much room, let alone the ability to change scenes, and act, affect the scenes and things like that. So I think that's really interesting. I wonder if that's just a new way of show running, or I don't know a whole lot about show running, so we'll just have to shelve that and ask him about that. So if you have some related questions for Ryan, we'd be happy to maybe squeeze those in if they're something that we would that we haven't thought of.
There's definitely different schools of thought and different techniques by directors or whatever. Usually in a bigger production like this, it's a little bit more regimented.
Yeah,
do it like this.
Exactly. It's like those shows that have
comedies. It's much more likely to take several cuts. You have the actors riff, pick the funniest one.
Yeah, there's like almost improv-ish, but this is, you're right. You don't see that in
a lot of comedies in particular. They take the standout parts of the actors that are playing it and weave it into the character. Be there like, oh, well, you're very good at doing this, so let's just write that into your character.
Yeah, that's true. They give them room to improv in a way that have shown they are very capable of. So Viserys, we talked about him. He's a pleaser, but he's a people pleaser, you could say, but it's mostly limited to other powerful men. He doesn't seem to care that much about pleasing the women around him until the end, when he apologizes very profusely, and it's a good apology. Sure, it probably should have been sooner, but better late than never. It was a really good scene. He took her seriously finally. She was very moved by it. It was what she had been kind of wanting to hear for 13 or 15 years. I'm not sure how old she is. And we obviously saw how he didn't take Emma as seriously as she should have. That's a pretty strong example of that. So not the most well-suited to be king. Definitely not the worst, as I said. Maegor, clearly worse. Aenys was worse as well. Aenys was even more of a people pleaser, even more of a softie. So we saw what happened there. Civil War. So when you have a soft king in an aggressive realm, people looking for their opportunity to make their way up and to cause violence in the name of their own ambition, you got to have a strong hand to manage that. And I don't mean a strong hand like Otto Hightower. I meant more like a firm grip, but also a strong hand helps. And Otto is not weak, but his focus is more on his own family's ambition himself, which is a funny thing. We can move on to Daemon with that. Daemon says he's a second son who's, got to steal everything. It's like, Daemon, you're a second son.
Everything he has. Yeah, you're a second son of a second son.
Yeah, and your own father was a second, so you're a second son of a second son. Yeah, it's like, so are you, man. Yeah, so and there's a lot of the Spider-Man meme of Otto and Daemon. They're like, he's the bad guy. No, he's the bad guy. It's like, you're both kind of bad guys. You're both doing things that are pretty evil. We don't.
Just because person A identifies person B as being bad doesn't mean person A is not bad.
Right.
And
yes.
And another thing too, a lot of times people project themselves onto others. Like someone who is honest, even naive, might be blown away to find out that someone lied to them. Whereas someone who is a dishonest, conniving person is suspicious that everyone else is dishonest.
Looking for the lies.
If Daemon, as a second son, knows that he's maneuvering for more power, he's more likely to be suspicious of Otto doing the same.
He knows
thing.
what other second son. He's got that second son mindset too. He's like, of course he's doing that. That's what I'm doing. He's like, he's not wrong. They
he
are.
might not realize or admit that he's doing it too, but his mind is in tune to it.
Yeah, they are. They both definitely have that second son syndrome of sorts. You could say, I think. And yeah, so he's constantly in his brother's shadow. You know, the gold cloak stuff is a little interesting. He is the first one to give them their gold cloaks. That's the term that's used into the modern series, but Daemon founded that. Before that, there was just kind of a generic city watch that wasn't super established. Daemon, brought them up a level. You have this comment with the thin gold line here, Asher?
Yeah, I just want to say I have to give a shout out to all the many jokes I've seen on Twitter making fun of Daemon for being a cop. Calling him, all gold cloaks are bastards. I've seen a tweet that was Daemon's house flag, and it was the thin blue line flag, but with a thin gold line. And so, that's obviously I don't want to get too much into that, but like I as much as Daemon could be redeemable for some things, like this is police brutality that he's an undertaking here, that he is championing, that he is saying this is the way it has to be. He is very pro this decision.
Yeah, and I'm real torn about this. Like, I obviously don't support just like all these summary justice and dismemberments, but I also just don't have a handle on how bad it is. Are there really just murderers running around in the streets?
I do think that Otto was out of touch. I agree that Otto is out of touch, and that there probably is a lot of crime in King's Landing. I don't agree that this is the solution to it, but I also don't think I have a good solution that would be quick.
Yeah, also agree with that.
Well, here's a couple things to keep in mind. We don't get an exact timeline, but it's not like he just suddenly did this last night. He was given the gold cloaks a long time ago and a big budget.
It took him a while to train them.
Finally, he has reappeared with a bunch of violent mercenaries on the street.
He was training them.
He could have spent that time working with the Maester of Laws
and figuring out
setting up a system of justice and some trials, and there's a lot of other ways he could have done. He's had at least some amount of time to work on it, but he went the violent, power grabbing way.
Yeah, and I think it's partly their fault. They appointed a violent man for this problem. Like, what did they expect?
Yeah,
right. Like this problem existed before Daemon was set to it. So if they had handled it sooner, maybe given someone with a lighter touch. Like, yeah, exactly. I think what did they expect by putting him in charge of this is, he goes, I hope you don't have to maim half my city. He's like, time will tell. That was pretty funny.
Time will tell, yeah.
But it was also
I was really thinking of Daemon as like the villain and antagonist of this show. It's really how I was perceiving him. The one line, I'm not going to quote it exactly correct, but he said something like, you don't want the streets to be full of like terror and crime, do you? And I felt like he was saying like lawlessness. He's like, I'm the terror. Me and my men, we don't have to follow the laws. You better be afraid of me. I've got this power now. That's kind of how I was interpreting it. That it was sort of a veiled threat. He's like, look, I can round up the criminals, but I can get you and your family also.
Speaking of a veiled threat, they sent him back to the Vale. Hey,
oh yeah.
No, it's like Rorschach, right? He's like, I'm not trapped in here with you. You're trapped in here with me.
You're trapped in here with me. Yeah. And I also, that line when he said time will tell, I was like, oh my God, what is this guy going to do? I got a little bit different perspective. I'm trying to look at it a little differently though. Once again, from that after the episode, inside the episode. Because I think it was Ryan Condal said he's a complicated guy, but he's not a monster. And my instinct was like, is he not like a monster?
Yeah,
like,
he seems kind of monstrous.
But I feel like, okay, I'll listen to the intent of the showrunner. Maybe I'm reading too deep.
A monster wouldn't have done what he did at the funeral, I think, for example. Like if he was a total monster. I think maybe what Ryan meant was he's not a total monster. He has some monstrous qualities.
Yeah, that's how I interpret it. Is that Daemon is not a total monster. He has monstrous qualities, but he has redeemable qualities, and he has vulnerabilities. Yeah. Most importantly,
the comparisons to Maegor are going too far. Maegor did not have these good qualities. He only had the monstrous qualities. He did not have any sort of mitigating, balancing factors.
Daemon cares what his family thinks.
Yes,
he cares about some things.
Yeah.
There is a difference, though, between not being a total monster and being a good guy, right?
Yes, exactly.
He did not call Daemon a good guy.
Yeah, he's not a good guy. Yeah. I don't think any of us will call him that.
No, while we're talking about him, I want to point out one other little thing that I noticed that I don't know if they did it intentionally, but I look for these details, meaning in these moments. He gave Rhaenyra that
Valyrian steel necklace. Yeah,
the Valyrian steel necklace. He took off a gold necklace she had on to put that there.
Yeah, or she took it off. But
then later he says, King's Landing is going to fear the color gold. Gold clothes. But I wonder, I wonder how deep that goes. I wonder if maybe he's accepting some responsibility as the bad cop, right?
Yeah.
So that she or other people can be the go. People don't have to be afraid of her, even if she makes like a tough decision.
Yeah.
He'll be the enforcer. So they don't have to be afraid of her, but they have to be afraid. I don't know if they meant for that symbolism to be there. But
it's an interesting moment. I'm glad you brought that scene up because it happens very early in the episode. And then by the end of the episode, those two who are pretty friendly in that moment, there's some familial tenderness, maybe a little Daemon's grooming her a little bit. Maybe that implication is there. That's up to you to judge. But they're clearly, by the end of the episode, they're cast on opposite sides. Like, well, I'm one heir, and I'm the one who was just set aside. So now we're no longer...
Yeah, and Daemon takes off, not to go to his wife, but he leaves with his lover, Lady Mysaria.
He's clearly not going to the Vale if he brings his lover with him. Like, that's a pretty strong implication. Which, Mysaria is a good thing for us to talk about as well. She comes off kind of as an enabler, doesn't she? Kind of like encouraging some of his worst behavior.
I just want to say, before we get into that, real quick, I wanted to go back to like thinking about how they're presenting things to us. And they start off with a dragon, and then, Rhaenyra and in King's Landing. We first see Daemon sitting on the Iron Throne.
Yeah.
And the Kingsguard being like, what the?
He's like, you can't do that. Like, he's very affronted.
Like, it's okay, it's okay. Yeah. Anyway, I think that was very telling, that scene, the way they presented that to us. Sorry, but
I'll also say, to connect to Mysaria and all that, one, I really liked how they had Daemon and Rhaenyra speaking to one another in High Valyrian, both as a way to show their intimacy, a way to show their closer ties to their Valyrian heritage, a way to let them keep secrets from other people. Like, it worked on a lot of levels for me.
Yeah. He sounded more severe and
Peterson employed.
Yeah, David Peterson employed.
No, worked out very well.
Yeah.
And I also, you catch that little thing from Mysaria that she's you can tell that she's not oblivious when she asks, hey, do you maybe want me to bring in a third person? Maybe someone with silver hair. She clearly has clocked that, like, hey, Daemon is into his own race of people.
Yeah, very much. Yeah,
and
the whole like
that.
Valyrian steel thing was really cool. He has Dark Sister, which is the sword that used to be wielded by Visenya. And remember when...
Oh, yeah, we've got our Visenya.
We've got our Visenya already. They're talking about him. He's even wielding her sword. And yeah, she was the older sister of Aegon, but Aegon was the king, so she was still behind the scenes and was in charge of a lot. But she was very severe and not very willing to be authoritative and violent if need be. But she was less chaotic than Daemon, to be sure.
I'm glad you pointed that out because I wasn't sure what he meant by we've already got our Visenya. I just assumed he was talking about Rhaenyra.
Oh.
Yeah, I know he was definitely talking about Daemon.
I didn't know enough about who Visenya was to get that parallels.
And that's important as well. Keep that in mind, that she named that figure. That's something to file away for later.
Yeah, so speaking of Rhaenyra, right? I personally loved how funny she was.
Yeah.
Like, I was like a nice surprise for me. I didn't honestly, like, in the show, like, some reading articles, reading reviews, people are like, there's no Tyrion character, there's no this, there's no that. Rhaenyra was that character to me. She's the one who's like, I just want to eat cake. I just, she's like, F the septa. Like, she was the, irreverent character of the bunch.
Yeah, and Alicent is more like if we're using your Jimmy and Chuck from Better Call Saul, the law-breaking brother and the sort of chaotic one. It's a similar relationship, except they're not actually related. In this case, Alicent is the rule follower. She's the one that we got to do what the Septa says. We got to do our lessons, we got to follow the rules. We're not going around on dragons, where Rhaenyra is like a little more, she's the more chaotic, does what she wants. Also, she has less restrictions, and she's also parented differently. She's got the absentee father, kind of Viserys, who's more focused on his models and ruling and having a son, and whereas Otto is just hardcore ambitious, like always looking for an angle.
I'm very curious to know how long ago Alicent's mother died, one, and two, what Alicent's relationship with Emma was, because we get that brief moment where Alicent is in the room when Rhaenyra goes to see her mother, and she says, "Hi."
They seem a little proper.
She seems proper with her,
maybe.
but if it's your daughter's best friend from childhood who you grew up with, and your daughter's best friend lost her mother, I feel like they might have had some intimate moments over time, Alicent and Emma. Like, I feel like if Emma was a decent woman, she would have reached out to Alicent after her mother died and tried to connect with her.
That's a good point. Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Speaking of intimate moments, we get this very seedy move by Otto where if you weren't sure about Otto before, you're like, oh, this is the kind of man he is. When he sends his daughter to comfort the king, and you know what he's trying to do. He's all concerned about the succession. Right. He wants her to dress like real nice, like he's trying to get her. He's trying to start something.
I wanted to ask that. I was like, I don't just have a dark mind.
No, you're right.
It's not just me. Is that what's happening
here?
Your
cynicism is completely accurate. He's trying to get something going there. He's trying to get her to, he's trying to get the king is vulnerable. She's young and pretty. That's totally what he's angling for.
Yeah, although,
a little too soon.
Yeah,
I don't know, man.
Yes, it is too soon.
And I think, honestly, as awful as it was, I was like, he didn't really give her any guidance there. Like, he didn't.
He just
tell
knew
her.
It was going to happen.
He just knew, you would think that he might have done any number of things to help facilitate this.
Besides
to be
wearing
clear,
his mom's dress,
I think this is terrible. But if you're going to send your daughter into the king's room, maybe write a message to the king for her to bring to him as an excuse, or tell her to read the book. It seems like Alicent came up with her strategy on her own. She decided, okay, I'll come, I'll read him a book, I'll connect with him about our shared loss. I think she was genuine in that. She was genuine, but I think she knew that was a cunning choice. I don't think she was oblivious to the fact that I need to have an angle to talk to him.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's the moment when he says, maybe wear your mother's dress, where I think it's the line that is, it's still very subtle. He's not coming out and saying it. It's super well done because he just kind of knows. You put a young girl and a grieving man in a room together and, it's just it might happen. And he's like, well, what's the risk to him? If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. If it does happen, he's even closer to power. His daughter has a connection or relationship with the king. That's the kind of thing he wants.
To him is losing his daughter's respect. I don't know.
He's not too worried about that, I guess.
Maybe he doesn't care about it.
Or he thinks
maybe he doesn't consider that a risk.
Maybe he doesn't see that as a problem, or he doesn't foresee that as an issue.
He might think she won't respect me if I don't care about our futures. I don't know that he necessarily would think anything that he's doing is bad.
Yeah.
So more to come. I'm looking for her. Yeah. I'm looking out for her best interests. Is probably how he thinks about it. I don't think he feels shitty about doing it.
Yeah, and it's not entirely shady, right? We know it is because of his motives, but he needs comfort. Yeah, it's right. He is sad. He does need this. And Alicent turns out to be a fantastic choice given the way she approaches it. Yeah, she's like, I wanted someone to say, I'm sorry. That was a great line.
Yeah, she
that was really good dialogue,
him,
It does come off as genuine.
Yeah, she doesn't seduce him. She's not coming in with that perspective. I don't know how long seduction might take, or whether she succeeds, etc.
Yeah, it's a slow burn. I think Otto sees that he's going to be traumatized for us. It's going to take a while to recover. There's no rush here, but get started now. Be the one, get initiative. She's the one positioned to benefit from his his sadness, and he needs new people to relate to. I guess you can
find some positive spins for it, but it still seems dark and manipulative to me. Yeah.
It is. I'm just pointing out why it works so well,
or why he justifies
he does need this. He really does need the comfort,
or why he doesn't think of it as dark.
Yeah,
himself,
that's how he can justify it in his own mind.
The king
needs, and if the king is sad, the whole realm suffers, which. That's partly true. I don't.
On the screen right now, I've got the Viserys and his model that he's doing. I just wanted to give a shout out to this.
Super cool, right?
Very cool. I don't know what y'all's perspective on this is. So he's creating a model of Valyria. Do you think that he saw dreams? through Balerion or just dreams, period, of Valyria and is replicating what he saw in his dreams? Or do you think there are some books that he's also using as a source? Or what are your guys' take on this?
I feel like there's got to be some books that have drawings of Valyria, but I also think there's room for what you said about dreams filling some of it out. If he dreamt of Valyria, and as you say, very cleverly you noted that Balerion was the only living creature who was now dead 17 years before that scene, roughly, had seen Valyria, the only living creature that had seen Valyria before it was destroyed by the Doom. So yeah, if he's able to see through his own dragon's eyes and memories, he would be able to see some direct evidence of it. But yeah, there's probably some books too.
Yeah, a little bit of both.
There could have been other people who saw it and then drew art of it, and
but yeah, he
before or after Valyria was destroyed.
Yeah, but he specifically talks. He's like, Balerion, who was his dragon that he used to have, was the last living creature to see Valyria. Like he says that in the episode, which just implies to me the idea that he knows well that Balerion saw Valyria because he could see it through Balerion's eyes.
Like, do dragons themselves have dreams? So we talk about dragon dreams, but those are human dreams. Do dragons have dreams? Like dogs dream, cats dream? I don't know.
Do dragons dream of fire sheep? Electric sheep, something like that?
Icy sheep? Yeah, I don't know.
They maybe even on some level, beyond dreams, might be able to communicate. Like, if we're to believe in this fantastic world that dragon riders can control and communicate with their dragons, who's to say they can't share imagery in their minds? I think it's at least possible, if not likely. And I also think it's possible, if not likely, that there would be books and stuff that would also have images so that he could piece it together. Yeah. I can imagine there's probably all kinds of characters in a world who tried to piece together prophecies from different sources. And he might be along that line.
Shay had it zoomed in on maybe those sphinxes there. I think those are Valyrian sphinxes.
Yeah, they are Valyrian sphinxes.
Ooh,
yeah, this is for people
cool.
wondering why we think it's Valyria or how we know or whatever. There's a few things, and it's cool because you really can see the similar architecture in how they did Valyria and Dragonstone, like in terms of how the building was. You could tell that it was built by the same people.
Yeah, it's like all so connected and like fused together. And
cool.
I want to know more about this.
Yeah,
I had another thought on it too, by the way, that it might be revealing of his character in certain ways, that he has, I don't know, it shows he has like a hobby. He's got to be working on this for a while and seems to have some talent. And so it might be something he uses to preoccupy himself with the stresses of being the king or an escape from being the king. And maybe it shows he has a certain amount of patience and artisticness to him. I can see a lot of different pieces of his character and personality being revealed through him having done this art project.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's a really fascinating hobby to have. We love it. Give him a lore-based hobby. You gotta love that.
I couldn't help but think of, if y'all have watched Parks and Recreation, when Ben Wyatt is depressed and he's making a stop motion animation thing. There's like a meme where he's like, "Does this look like something a depressed person would make?"
And Rob's character's like, "That is the most depressed person I've ever seen." Yeah. Okay, let's go through some callbacks and references, like small moments that refer to other big things. What's up?
Maybe you meant to move on through it, but we would start off going through characters.
We've covered Alicent,
Otto.
We've covered it all.
You said Corlys.
We talked about him separately. We're good.
Okay. Yeah, we gotta have a quick clip here.
So we have reference to Alicent was kind of cool. There was a quote that said, "Things have gone downhill in King's Landing since my grandmother's death." That's Alicent, the good Queen Alicent, who cared whose style of rule focused a lot more on the common folk, while her husband Jaehaerys was a lot on the bigger picture and focused more on the nobles and patching up the civil, which is a very important job. He earned the nickname the Conciliator. Some of the other aspects of his rule, the credit belongs to people like Alicent and Septon Barth, but in terms of bringing the realm together after all the civil wars of Maegor, that was mostly him. He was the chief architect of the peace that followed. So he does deserve a lot of credit for that. And so, but apparently Alicent, this is a reference to Daemon saying the city is a little out of hand. This builds the evidence for what he's saying being accurate. So that's important. Princess Nymeria. This moment was so funny. We got a reference to Princess Nymeria in the book. She literally takes a page out of Nymeria's book. That moment caused me and Shay to flinch.
Oh, yeah.
Both times. The third time I didn't flinch, but the first two times I saw the scene, I was like, It's sacrilege, tearing a page. But then we got the joke. It was like, oh, that's funny. She took a page out of Nymerea's book.
And I think that I want a few angles for why Rhaenyra would be taking a page out of Nymerea's book. Well, obviously, Nymeria was a female ruler, so that's relevant because now Rhaenyra is the heir. But also, Nymeria is known for her many loves. There's a book in A Song of Ice and Fire that's references, the loves of Queen Nymeria that Ariane Martell talks about how she wishes she was reading that. And so you could imagine that Rhaenyra herself will take a page out of Nymeria's book and have a few different loves.
Yep, and maybe some of that will go similarly. We'll certainly be bringing those points up as they happen rather than just fire hosing you with all of it now. Something to look forward to. So that's pretty cool. There's definitely other things Rhaenyra has in common with Nymeria, like age. Nymeria was princess of her city-state within the Rhoynish Principality as a teenager. And Rhaenyra here is an heir at a similar age. Let's see. We
got a cool dragon statue.
Yeah, look at that cool dragon statue. I guess that's it looks like it's made of obsidian, or maybe it's meant to be black. It's black because it's meant to be Balerion, but either way, it looks awesome.
Yeah, that was a cool thing just to show, how different King's Landing is.
We have Rhaenyra and Alicent when they're walking through the courtyards, the various spots in the Red Keep. They cross over this courtyard that a lot of y'all will recognize as the place where Cersei eventually commissioned that whole Westeros murals. This is that same exact location, and that's pretty cool. We'll call back to that.
Yeah, I love them walking through like arms linked. I don't know. I really have to say how much I really like the friendship that they've shown between those two.
Yeah.
It reminds me, by the way, the discussion between Aemma and Rhaenyra reminded me of Cersei and Sansa.
Yes.
Much less dark, but it's similar sort of like mentoring. Like, you got to understand what your life is really going to be.
Yeah, Cersei was more cruel about it. But they were both basically being honest. Cersei was just a little hardcore about it. So next one, we have Daenerys' brother, by the way, Viserys, would have been Viserys III if he had actually been king. This, of course, is Viserys I. And we should see the birth of Viserys II during the timeline of the show. So watch out for that. A feast for crows is mentioned. Viserys angrily yells, "I will not sit here while you crows feast on the corpse of my family," or whatever, however he words it. So that was surely intentional as a reference to A Feast for Crows, many people's favorite of the 5 A Song of Ice and Fire novels to date. The cat's paw dagger was just everywhere. Viserys is just constantly having it. It's on his belt at all times. But he puts his hand right on it as he's talking about the A Song of Ice and Fire reveal to his daughter, specifically when he talks about the cold winds blowing. That's, of course, the dagger that Arya kills Night King with. So it's very meaningful and momentous. And we'll talk about it later, but the trailer seems to show that there's even more to this dagger. Maybe there's some writing on it. So this won't be the last time we talk about the dagger. Yeah,
it will not be.
Yeah, it's also in other scenes, so it's going to keep coming up. It's going to be maybe even more prominent in House of the Dragon than it was in Game of Thrones, but it'll be a race. So it'll be tough to, A huge one. We'll talk about the Song of Ice and Fire lore completely separately because that's such a big topic. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, I was wondering if I should bring that up now.
And again, remember everyone that we do have a Saturday stream at 3 p.m. Eastern where we will talk a lot about spoilery topics. And so if we have not addressed something here, you have another shot at it.
Yeah. The line, oh man, so strong. Promise me, Rhaenyra. Promise me. Ooh. Makes some people think that maybe the promise that Lyanna was extracting from Ned did involve some of the Song of Ice and Fire detail, which is possible. Rhaegar could have absolutely told her, Lyanna. No question that's possible. He knew about it. He told Dany in his dream, or Dany dreamed of him saying to his newborn son, his is the Song of Ice and Fire. So that phrase is absolutely in there. So it's well set up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask a second ago. Like, maybe the promise me is just to kind of like to tie the original Game of Thrones series together with this one. But there's an implication that, or the potential that if the Targaryens have been passing this dream along, that Rhaegar would have told Lyanna would have told Ned and said, "Promise me," and that might make us think about some of Ned's actions a little bit differently.
Yeah, it's great because it works so well without that. Because Ned taking care of his beloved sister's kid totally works without anything else. But that's so great. George loves to add something on top. It's so well concealed. You could have both so easily, and that's great. Really well done.
Does it justify him not telling Kat? I don't know. Maybe more important.
It adds another angle to that, though. You're right.
Yes. And it does. I feel one thing that, like Jon felt like he was almost duped into going to the wall. No one really told him what it was going to be like. But maybe Ned needed him to go to the wall. I always felt Ned didn't really push him into it. That Jon just kind of wanted to. But Ned didn't warn him the reality of it.
Right.
But maybe because Ned did want him to go.
Yeah, he was more willing to accept it. It certainly fit for a lot of reasons. Okay, so Emma in the tub was maybe a callback to Dany in the tub.
Definitely.
Where she wanted it really hot. Okay, not maybe.
I mean, literally, he comes in, he's like, oh, the tub is tepid. It's not very hot. Dragons, we like it hot. And obviously, Dany is the whole thing with her in the tub is that she likes it very hot.
Her handmaids are like, it's too hot. And then she's like, nah, I got this. And they're like, wow, it's not too hot. She just got right in that hot ass water. And no problem.
So I really liked that little shout out connection there.
Yeah.
And Emma was so good too.
Yeah, Emma
was so
good. What an amazing one episode arc she had. Rhaenyra drinking as I'm sorry, Rhaenys. It's even written properly here. I just read it wrong. Rhaenys drinking while she explains breaks down the violence of the tourney and the state of the realm and how it's maybe not the best idea to welcome our new prince with something like this. It's totally an I drink and I know things moment because she is totally sipping on the wine while saying it. It's so good. And she is. And as we said before, it's another example of why this couple probably would have been a better ruling couple than Viserys and Emma.
Yeah, Rhaenys I think Eve Best maybe had the best facial reactions, funniest reactions to things in the show to me.
When her cousin's like, "Can I have your favor?" And
she's like,
the queen who never was, and I was like, "You could have his tongue out." And Viserys is like, "Oh, come on, don't worry about that." And then he just loses, and she's like, drinks another, drinks down her wine. Like, yep, that figures.
That was fun.
It's maybe not a huge point, but I just wanted to say that while I was watching that conversation between Rhaenys and Corlys, it didn't hit me till the second time around, the deeper meaning that it had, and also that their conversation wasn't just among fans of the tournament or even council members to the king. It was among a former potential heir to the throne.
Yeah.
And I don't know, their opinions were, their opinions were coming from a lot of different angles.
We have a question here just to clarify something. Dark Horse asked, do we know who the kids are at the tourney? That's Laena Velaryon and Laenor Velaryon. They're two children. Corlys and Rhaenys do have two children sitting in front of them, and you saw them, Laena was a little scared, and Laenor was a little excited at the action going on.
Appears to be a small change from the books. I believe Laena was made younger.
Yes, here. Laena is of an age with Rhaenyra, a little bit older than Rhaenyra, in fact, in the books. But instead, they made Alicent and Rhaenyra similar in age, and Laena a little younger. And as we go forward in future weeks, we'll get into why they did that. But it was very deliberate.
Yeah,
it was
so many characters to talk about, so we'll say.
Yeah, exactly. It was not a mistake that they that they did not mess up the dates. Right. In other words.
So let's talk about the Song of Ice and Fire part here. Aegon's dream. This was a pretty big reveal. A lot of us heard about this kind of burbling through the fandom before it even came up. And it's been an idea that's been in the fandom for a long time. To have it stated out loud like this was pretty big. I'm lacking the right word here, but it was big. It was huge. It was a huge moment. Viserys becomes fervent. He's really intense in a way that is distinct from his behavior and acting the entire rest of the episode. It's a very new look for him compared to his laid back, to his really sad, to his really angry. We had a lot of moods from Viserys. It's a really fantastic job of acting. We get a really wide variety of looks at him. And he's says this secret's been passed down from king to king, which creates a little bit of a, how did that happen? Because we had a civil war between Maegor, and Maegor didn't go pass it on to the people that he was usurped from, nor did he give it to the king that took the throne back from him, which was Jaehaerys. Our best theory, our only theory other than books filling in some of this, maybe some of it was written down, is that Aegon's queens were included in it. Rhaenys and Visenya would have known as well. That's part of how the idea was sold to them. We need to do this conquest. Rhaenys dies early on in the war, so she's just kind of out. She doesn't play into this at all. Visenya outlives Aegon. Presumably, she told her son Maegor about it, and Aenys was told directly by Aegon. Aenys has his reign, is then overthrown. His children are overthrown in place of Maegor. Visenya tells Maegor. Maegor is in turn overthrown by his own people.
Dancing's enjoined.
Maegor is then overthrown by his own people, and Jaehaerys takes the throne. So there's a disconnect there. We figure that the missing link is Rhaena. Rhaena was the first born of Aenys and Alyssa Velaryon, and she married Aegon, the uncrowned, who would have been the third king, but Maegor usurped him and killed him in the process. But she lived, so she may have had the secret as well. She may have gotten it because she was a twin, or not a twin, but she was born close to her brother husband, so she probably knew the secret. She probably passed it on to Jaehaerys.
Probably did not help with her stress levels either. Rhaena was known for being particularly she had just had a lot of trauma that happened in her life. But
Rhaena was the mother of Rhea, the one who had that awful trip to Valyria on Valyrian's back that she became infected. That's her daughter. So that's this Rhaena that we're talking about. Yeah, she had a traumatic life. So she may have been the link to pass it on to Jaehaerys, who then passed it to Viserys. It's easy to see how it got from Jaehaerys to Viserys. So presumably, at the Great Council there'll be an off-screen moment where as soon as he's elected, Jaehaerys is like, all right, come here, grandson, I got a secret for you. And whether or not Viserys told Aemma is an open question. I'm guessing no. But he may have told her. And he definitely tells Rhaenyra. So that's how it gets to there. Yeah.
I can imagine he might have told her. That might have been part of what pushed her to get pregnant.
Absolutely.
Again, even though she shouldn't have.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, he told her about other dreams he'd had, about dreams he'd had. So it seems like he clearly talked to her about mystical stuff.
Yeah. It occurs to me, too, that other Targaryens, even ones that weren't in line for succession, might have just had the dream. They might have just been aware of it anyway because they had the dreams themselves. They might not have fully understood it, but maybe they did. Maybe I imagine there was some sharing of data among Targaryens and whoever had these dreams. Maybe not. Maybe a lot of the details are lost. It's already hard enough to interpret them when you're, telling it to a person who tells it to another person, and it's spread over a generation. You can see misinterpretations coming from it. But,
absolutely.
But anyway, I could see a lot of different ways for it to be temporarily lost and regained again because someone had the dream again, or read it in a book and pieced it together with something someone told them, or whatever else.
And let's dial it back to what we know about prophecy. You're familiar with this concept, Sean. Something we've talked about a lot is that the event is there in the future, available to various forms of prophetic magic and dreams to be detected. Aegon's dream is not the only source for this. We know Melisandre comes along much later knowing about a lot of this stuff. She didn't learn it from Aegon, and the Azor Ahai prophecy and the Prince that was promised prophecies are way older than Aegon the Conqueror. So it's no way he's the first one to dream of these events or the first one to know about them. He may have been the first in his family. Maybe not, though. Maybe not even that. Maybe his ancestor Daenerys the Dreamer also dreamt of this amongst her many dreams. So that's a very important factor that he's not the only one who knew, although he may be the only one in his close family that knew. And that knowledge could have been lost elsewhere, but it also gets rediscovered. Right? Rhaegar at some point rediscovers, I must be a warrior. Aerys the First, again, not the Mad King, Aerys the First during the time of Dunk and Egg. Egg says, King Aerys found this prophecy in an old book that says the dragons will return again, and it's like, so there are other sources for these things, although they are pretty vague at this point. So that's a very important factor.
Oh, you know what? Wasn't there, this might be kind of deep for our show discussion, but wasn't there a Targaryen king who was delivered a message from Dorne about another Targaryen princess maybe that had died, and he clutched the message till he bled?
That was Aegon. Yeah, that was Aegon the Conqueror. Yeah.
Aegon. And then left, and it was a mysterious, why did he live, where did he go? And we were wondering maybe he went to research something. Maybe the person that died had a dream. Wanted the dream, the message to not be lost, and she's like, hey, you got to tell Aegon about this dream I had. Write this message. They send it, and
There's
Anyway,
possibilities, yeah, for sure. It's certainly that's certainly a big mystery, and it's open to a lot of theorizing. That's for sure.
But by the way, that just reminded me of another point I wanted to ask about in the show earlier. When we saw Otto Hightower, when Alicent came in and he ends up sending her to talk to Viserys, you remember that he was like sealing a message to send home?
Yeah, what was he sending?
Yeah.
Very good catch. I was wondering about that too. I have no idea. He's warning his family, something.
Yeah,
I think you're
maybe
great.
he's worried about disability. Something. Rhaegar is gonna do. Daemon is gonna do.
I was guessing it was just about the death of the queen. That's what I was guessing. It had to do with that.
Yeah.
That would be my.
Could just be routine responsibilities he's fulfilling, but
yeah, I would guess he was saying like, "Hey, the queen is dead. I'm going all in on getting." I don't think he was overt about it. I don't think he like said anything that if the message got compromised that he would get in trouble for saying as well.
Yeah.
Like, he's probably aware that like you don't want to write anything too bad on paper.
Okay, let's talk about a few other random lore bits. I've got a section here on history repeating itself. We'll save that for another time. That's something that is not. It doesn't have to be talked about right now. There's lots of times to talk about history repeating itself. But basically, there's some patterns here in the Targaryen history with how they've ruled, what style of rule has worked and not worked, and how things have kind of swung one way to the other, like the pendulum swinging from brutality to good management to somewhere in between. So yeah, we'll save that for another time. The Dragon Keepers were pretty cool, huh?
Yeah. I think some people expect them to be different because they're described differently in Fire and Blood. They're a little bit more of like a monastic, like
this makes more
order.
sense.
It makes sense to me. I think it was cool how they're able to control the dragons by speaking to them, despite not being the dragons, a partnered human.
It's kind of like how dogs just learn commands. It's like if you really get into it, like how did dogs learn that? But dragons too, I guess.
It definitely seemed to be a new guy and a veteran managing them.
Good detail.
There's a learning process probably for both the dragons and the handlers. I also hope that we might get one of those characters featured. It might be a neat POV for one of those dragon handlers to, the insights they might get to the relationships between the dragons and the riders, the little conversations they might overhear.
I would love to see a day in the life of a dragon keeper or something like that.
Yeah.
I generally, that is what I would like to see out of the show, is I would like to see a more common person's perspective, although, a dragon keeper isn't exactly the most common person because it's a very specific thing, niche thing that they're working in. But the point remains that I would like to see nobility. I would like to see a POV, a person who, were featured for more than an episode. So I don't know who we'll see in that.
Really reminds me of like real world, like the people who keep really dangerous animals, like a snake charmer or like a poisonous snake is arguably more likely to kill you than a dragon in that situation. You know what I mean? Like a dragon killed more people, but like you could survive a glancing blow from dragon flame, poisonous snake bite in that era, you're dead. So yeah, anyway, there are people willing to work with dangerous animals is my point. That's the real world thing.
My mind was still thinking in the terms that I thought of when we first saw the dragon flying in was they're like air traffic controllers, like a airman on an aircraft carrier directing the jet landing or something.
Yeah,
I like
totally.
It.
Which is also dangerous.
And the dragon knew its name. They called it Syrax. Like it knew its own name, which was kind of neat. Like dogs a lot of times recognize their own names too.
I was impressed that Syrax knew to burn just Aemma and Balon, just the corpses, and like go Dracarys, which spoke to me that it said to me that there is a mental connection. If I didn't already think that, I think it even more that Rhaenyra had to be thinking, burn burn that. Like there's a connection there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dragon didn't just randomly blow fire, and it kind of similar to Dany. The dragon blew fire at her enemies.
Yeah,
there's a mental connection, or even some level of intelligence to understand the intent, or maybe to know this tradition that they've gone through before, or whatever.
Agree. Yeah.
Dragons don't necessarily have to like speak proper English and study Shakespeare to be intelligent. Quote unquote.
That's another thing. Like dogs,
so.
dogs can sense when their owner doesn't like someone or whatever. It's really neat.
Dogs can read Shakespeare too.
Dogs can read. Woof. All right. A couple more super chats here as we work our way to our final moments here. Go Saber 7 says, so is Rhaenyra reading from signs and portents in the upcoming week's preview? We will address that in the Saturday episode. We have not had a chance to do our zoom and enhance on the trailers yet because that was out last night and we've been focused on this episode.
It's possible she's reading from the dagger.
Yeah. So we'll get to we'll
talk about that more on Saturday then.
Yeah. Fitzchivalry Snow says it's pretty interesting the way Daemon was using the secret passages already. Yes, he was spying on the council. Yeah, we forgot to bring that up. That is very interesting. He seems like he knew some secrets of the Red Keep.
Definitely.
That's a thing. Maegor's the one who built all those secret passageways. It was kind of funny that they were comparing him to Maegor as he's using the passages built by Maegor. But yeah, that's a very good catch that he's knows a bit of the Red Keep's inner workings in ways that have not fully been explained to us. We don't know what his extent of his knowledge is there, or who else knows them. Like, it's often the Master of Whispers who knows such things, but again, there isn't one right now. So, like, does Otto know about the secret passages, or to what level does he? That's a big open question right now. I'm sure we'll find out some of that. TKOK Podcast Network says Mysaria played Daemon and I felt goaded him in a way into the Heir for a Day thing. She was definitely pushing him. That's why I did call her a bit of an enabler before. So yeah, I kind of agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree goaded. I think enabled
Maybe
and
pushed,
like allowed that situation to happen, but I don't think she goaded him to saying anything that was controversial there. She just wanted him to address everyone, but she was happy about the death.
Yeah.
And so that was just a dark thing to feel for sure. So yeah, Mysaria goes by Lady Misery in the books. And so we will be seeing a lot more of her.
Yeah, she's Lysine.
Yeah, she's an interesting. I really like that actress. She's known for doing a lot of like sci-fi stuff, Sonoya Mizuno, and so I expect to see really good things from her going forward.
That was another thing that I looked at differently. Not only was I watching it a second time, but haven't seen the insights from the showrunners. That Daemon did seem to be down, like he was in this place of festivity.
Yeah, but he was sad.
He wasn't really happy.
No.
And he really did feel offended when his brother was like, but you were celebrating. He's like, we all have to grieve in our own ways.
He wasn't really celebrating. Yeah.
It's hard for him to explain himself in that moment, especially when he's kind of under threat by the Kingsguard. But it is making me come around that there's more to his character than just a monster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it makes him a lot more compelling as a character. It wouldn't be as fun if he was just some violent, murderous psychopath.
I love his reaction to when Viserys is like, "Oh, Daemon wouldn't have the patience for the throne. He doesn't want it."
Yeah.
And Daemon just smiles,
just
like
laughs. And Otto has maybe the best line of the show, of that episode, where he says, "The gods have yet to make a man who lacks the patience for absolute power." I was like, great line. Like, Viserys has no answer to that. He's like, whoa, that was very eloquent and true, I guess.
And it's true, because that is like in Fire and Blood, and that is kind of a thought that people have, like a sentiment, is that Daemon didn't really want the throne, but I think they're showing like that's kind of a spin.
Yeah, it's kind of a spin. So Otto is right to be worried that Daemon wants the throne, and Otto is right that Daemon would not be a good ruler. Like, Daemon would not be a good ruler, I don't think. It like seems right. It seems his read on that situation seems right. It's another example of not just because Otto is right about Daemon and Daemon's right about Otto doesn't mean they're both right about everything, or that they're both good guys, or that they're both entirely bad guys. But
yeah.
It might be another example, Otto there projecting himself onto others. And like, I don't have enough patience. I want absolute power. So if I'm like that, he must be too, right?
Frozen Whirlpool says, so by that right, do you not find it disingenuous for them to say Jaehaerys ruled through a time of peace? No, I think it was a time of peace. I think most of the rot in Jaehaerys' reign began right at the end. Alicent died not that long before him.
And all the like there were dramas that happened that weren't peaceful, in quotes, like like the stuff with Araya isn't exactly peaceful, but it isn't war.
Right. I think the mismanagement, I think, is most of it comes near the end of his reign and the beginning of Viserys' reign, as they just got lax. Like, we're rich, everything's great. What do you mean problems? It's great, we're doing fine, and they just weren't raised to rule. They weren't taught properly how to be kings. Like a lot. There's various issues here, but I don't think it's disingenuous. I think that because most of the vast majority of Jaehaerys' reign was peaceful without the setup for this. Most of the setup came at the end and at the beginning of Viserys' reign. I think it's open for interpretation.
As we talked about, I don't really have thorough knowledge of this time period, but I think it's worth noting that if someone rules through a time of peace and it's for 10 years or whatever, maybe they just got lucky.
Yeah.
But if you rule through a time of peace and it's 60 years, you probably get some credit for that.
Yeah.
Right? You had to be proactive to make it last that long.
Yeah.
You didn't just get lucky to have it at the right time
I
period.
agree. And again, this comes back to him being the conciliator as well. He stopped a lot of wars that were in progress. He stopped, mended a lot of fences, built a lot of bridges that had been burned. And that helped set that up. That was very proactive, and it kept for a while. It held, and he kept doing similar things that were, more proactive because they weren't problems brought over from the previous regime. All right, let's finish up with what we'll do every episode. Every Monday, we'll each highlight a performance. We'll each highlight a scene or plot point that really stood out, and then we'll each highlight a dragon moment. Not as many dragon moments this first time. There's only 2 dragons in this one, but surely that's going to be increasing. I'll start. Ashia, you go first. You have your one listed first here, unless you want me to go first.
Yeah, one. Okay. Yeah, I will say that my standout is kind of the same as yours, but I kind of said one different just to be different from that. But so I'm gonna lead into yours. I think that Emma Aaron, the actress playing her, had a lot of pressure on her to get this role right, and I think she absolutely sparkled, stood out, just had so much life and personality, and I just like this sparkle in her eyes that just made you want to see more of her character, to be honest. I don't really know that there was a lot of things that she specifically did, but just the way that she interacted with Rhaenyra, I really felt this tragic loss of Rhaenyra's losing her mother figure, and she did a really good job. But my other shout out will be the same one y'all say, which is Millie Alcock as Rhaenyra, who I thought was very funny.
She crushed it. Yeah, she did the wide range of emotions. She was funny. She was sad. She was nervous. She was anxious. She was irreverent. She was a lot of things. And to me, though, the moment that really got me, the moment that gets me choked up, and was just brilliant acting amidst a whole lot of brilliant acting, was when she chokes up saying Dracarys and she can't get it out. She said, because you know what word is coming. Everyone's prepared for the Dracarys. And then she stumbles on it, and it was so authentic. So well done. It got me so well. Every time I've watched it 3 times now, and just that was the highlight of a bunch of great acting from her. It's too bad we won't have her for the long term, but I'm sure older Rhaenyra will also be awesome.
Yeah, I know they won't be doing this, but man, I would really love it if they would just continue doing some flashbacks going forward.
Yeah.
If season 2 or something, they have a scene that they're like, we'd really like to show this background story. It would be fun for me personally to get a little more with these young actresses, because I love them so much. Shout out to Emily Carey as well, who I happen to have seen a number of interviews with her at this point, and so I can say that she really is playing a very different type of character to who she is in her demeanor. She's playing this nervous, anxious, nerdy character, anxious person versus what the impression I get of her.
And Sean, how about you? You also?
Yeah, I think Rhaenyra, and for this exact same reason you said, it's not just that it's my favorite. I just think it was the best. I think that moment at the funeral was just the best moment of performance of the. And
then she sucks it up and finds her inner strength, and then it's super good. Yeah.
I guess just to name another one, but you also mentioned it earlier too, but Viserys went through a range, that moment in the council, we suddenly got angry about look, my wife and daughter, my child, I can't handle this political bickering at this moment,
it was very real, very authentic and very typical of the way he rules. Yeah.
And he kind of got a little frustrated with Daemon and that back and forth in the throne room too. It's I've given you so much and you always throw it back at me. There was emotional moments that I appreciated, especially among a lot of, I don't even mean to say this negatively because I think it's necessary, but there was a decent amount of exposition, right? There was a lot of moments of, and in fact, I think they did a good job of having people reveal information to the audience through natural conversation. It wasn't too unnatural to say, "Hello, my brother Daemon. I am glad to see you were in charge of the city. Watch now." I think they did it a little more natural.
Yeah, it didn't feel
but a lot of that stuff still isn't particularly emotional dialogue. But we still got good emotion out of Viserys.
So I can say that we're all 3 of us found Millie Alcock's performance as Rhaenyra to be our favorite performance of
Seems
the
like
episode. We're agreed on that. I guess my question would be: is there a character you're most excited to see what they do as the rest of the season progresses?
Yeah, like we haven't seen a lot of Rhaenys or Corlys yet. They certainly
Yeah.
made an impression, but we haven't gotten a lot of focus on them yet. I really
really
like
like-
Otto's acting, even though his character was really skeevy.
I really liked how Corlys wasn't drinking, how he covered his drink. Just a
That
little,
was
small,
very
like,
nice
subtle
touch.
choices there. Says a lot.
Very focused, very serious, yeah.
I don't know about excited to see. I'm scared to see what Daemon is going to do. I'm scared to see what Otto Hightower is going to do.
Yeah, what kind of maneuvering.
I expect intrigue. They might not be as clearly villainous as Joffrey or something, but it's similar to Joffrey as he sparks drama. He's going to make action unfold in the series. So
Okay.
on that level, I guess I'm excited to see what they do.
I'll say I'm particularly excited to see the whole Velaryon family, Rhaenys, Corlys, and their kids, and all that.
What is your favorite highlighted scene from this one, Ashaya?
My favorite scene,
Or plot point, yeah.
I'm going to name two right now.
Okay.
I really liked the whole tourney scene in terms of like how it felt and how real and glorious and grand it was, and the armor. There's a lot of things I liked about it, but in terms of the scene I enjoyed watching the most, I enjoyed Alicent and Rhaenyra talking about Nymeria. While Rhaenyra's got her head
With the
in
heart
Alicent's
tree
lap,
and
and she's
everything.
like, oh, I've got a position I like quite a lot, and she's talking
Yeah.
about Alicent's lap. I really, really like what they did there with deciding to make them close in age and make them friends. I think that a lot of women in particular can really relate to that concept that like your girlhood best friend is so close that it's like I'm without saying anything more, I'm very nervous for how things are going to play out going forward.
You can already see where there would be some conflict if Rhaenyra is now the heir, yet Alicent's father is pushing her to get close to the king. So that's...
you're like things aren't necessarily going to go well for them going forward.
That's not
So, but
ideal.
again, they change a lot of things.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that pans out.
What's your other one? You said you had two.
The tourney.
Oh, the tourney.
Yeah.
And that scene with Alicent.
Yeah,
Okay, what
that's
about you?
an
What about you?
actiony scene and a talking scene is what I'll say.
I'll go with the Song of Ice and Fire reveal. I love the way it's set up. I love how Viserys becomes a different person in this moment. And just with the backdrop of Balerion's skull and all his fears, and him saying the Iron Throne is the most dangerous seat in the world. I love the imagery of the skull and the candles and that shrine, and him putting his hand on the dagger and the interspersing of Lord Stark and the kneelings. And yeah, I'll go with that one. It's hard to pick, but I'll highlight that. What about you, Sean?
I think it's like, I don't want to pick it. I don't know how to say this. I want my highlight moment to be like a woo, like a fist pump moment.
Yeah.
But the one that I felt stuck with me the most is more of a dark moment, was when Viserys, trying to make light of this conflict between Otto Hightower and Daemon, his brother.
Yeah.
At the council meeting. And Viserys is trying to find common ground and settle things down. And he's like, look, I understand what you did, but in the future, don't be so extreme. I just hope you don't have to kill half the city to get law into place. And Daemon says, time will tell.
Yeah.
It's like, ooh, that one's still like,
It's funny,
my
yeah.
heart is still a little sunk for that
Because it was
moment,
funny, but also like, ooh, how is he serious?
Yeah.
Yeah, like what's really gonna happen here? Yeah.
And it showed, he's honest about that. Like,
Like,
it
no, this
showed
problem
that
is bad.
Damon,
Yeah.
it spoke to Damon's perspective on things in a good way, I think. Like, the fact that he isn't like, there, I fixed it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he doesn't just think he fixed it by doing that.
And he's like, it remains to be seen how my current actions will affect the situation. We have to
Exactly.
let it play out.
Can I say that I'm probably going to reveal my level of unsulliedness? Kind of going back to Shay's question, like, what are we excited to see going forward? Generally speaking, most of the characters I feel were at best tolerant. Like, there's a lot of like mistakes, ineptness, chauvinism, violence coming from most all the characters. There is one person that I thought was most closely presented as a hero. Kriston Cole. And now,
as we
I'm
laugh.
aware that there's some controversy surrounding him. I'm
Yeah.
expecting maybe some sort of Jaime Lannister vibes or something. I don't know, but he's maybe someone I should be excited to see more from, one way or the other.
But this is the value of you. One of the values of you being here, because Shay and I, we know too much about who he is. We would never have said what you said, but you're right. He is being framed as this interesting up and comer that
kind of
we don't
outsider,
have a lot of opinion on.
Yeah.
Like there's no reason to dislike him at this point.
No, there is no reason to dislike Kristen Cole. Absolutely not. There's reasons to like him.
Maybe you have reasons. But yeah, so that...
I have a reason to like him. I mean, he's Dornish. I already am biased. I like Dornish people.
He beat Daemon, yeah.
Yeah, he beat Daemon. He chose Rhaenyra as, to get his favor. He was generally... He was trying to be honorable in his fight with Daemon. He didn't just he wanted him to yield.
Well, he did hit him in the back.
Yeah, I guess you're
cheering,
right,
But still.
I mean, he was cheering. I feel like... I don't think
that's... Daemon had already been dishonorable multiple times.
Yeah, I don't think it was dishonorable for him to do that.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad. Yeah, he didn't hit him hard. He didn't hit him in the head either. He hit him in the thick part of his armor, I think. He could have hit him in the back of the leg, which would have really got,
Wish I could remember how clear it was, but yeah, it seemed like it was the torso, a way just to knock him down, not to maim him or...
It knocked him down and then he pinned him. It was then it was over. It was then he stepped on his hand and that was it. Yeah, he kicked the sword away.
Had to be hyper aware. If I was fighting the prince of the Targaryens, I would not want to kill him.
Yes!
I would be aware to maybe not hurt him
Daemon
terribly.
Knows that, which is maybe part of the argument for why he wasn't wearing a faceplate, which I don't know. I fully buy that, but it's something.
By the way, in Duncan Egg, that was how Baelor was. Well,
you're totally right. No, you're right. Yeah, no, you're totally right. He did. He's like, the Kingsguard won't hit me because I'm the prince.
But yeah, he just got hit in the head with the Morning Star, and the person that did it had to live with that and it was shame for the rest of his life.
It wasn't one of the Kingsguard. Yeah, you're right. So, very good point. So, highlight dragon moment. Like I said, there's not a lot of dragon moments in this one. There'll be more. The dragons were really cool, but we're just getting started there. There were only 2 dragons. All they did was just fly a little bit. They didn't do much else. But yeah, I loved seeing. I'll go with Syrax. Just the moment we kind of already discussed, where the dragon keepers are. We see some of the day-to-day of how this works, like where they live, where they get saddled, who's handling them and feeding them. I approve and appreciate of this part of the little, very tiny part of the story being made more real and grounded.
I loved seeing Caraxes, how cool they designed Caraxes to look with that, the feet tail thing and all that. But I also really liked seeing Daemon introducing Caraxes to Mysaria and riding on Caraxes with her as well, because relevant plot wise.
Like the detail of the wind blowing out, his hair blowing back as he's getting close to him because the dragon's breathing out, and you're right. And he's got the really long neck. Long neck boy.
Caraxes is called the blood worm, and so you can see why they call him a worm, because he is wormy, long boy.
Yeah, whereas Syrax's neck wasn't nearly that long. What about you, Sean? Any favorite dragon moments or observations you want to throw out?
My favorite dragon moment was Rhaenyra being crowned.
Nice. Nice. What a necklace. That thing is bling as hell, huh? That necklace is insane.
I have another answer. It's also slightly avoiding the real question, but the scene with Viserys and Rhaenyra and with Balerion skull in the background.
It was a dragon one day.
Just to get a feel for how large Balerion must have been. That thing's skull was almost as big as the entire other dragons. You know?
It was huge, right? Okay, folks, that's our episode. Join us Saturday at 3 with our first guest, Joe Magician, and then back to Monday at 6 next week for episode 2, which will be formatted a lot like this one was. We have a lot of other episodes from our back catalog that refer to topics in this one. I have a huge list here. We have an episode on Dark Sister, Daemon's Sword. We have 4 episodes on the Dance of the Dragons, the whole thing, which goes a lot farther with Radio Westeros. We're 4 episodes in out of a planned 7. The Sea Snake. We got a whole episode on the history of the Sea Snake. We got a whole episode on the Stepstones, which includes some of the conflict that's described in this episode. We got an episode on House Royce if you want to learn more about the family Daemon married into. We even talk about Rhea, his wife. The Doom of Valyria, we've got an episode on that, which of course is referenced a couple times here. We got an episode on Balerion the Black Dread, the one who owns that big old skull. We got an episode on the heresies of Septon Barth, who was Jaehaerys' right-hand man or left-hand man, whichever you want to say. Alicent would be the other hand. We've got 2 episodes on Nymeria, Mother Royne, and 10,000 Ships. Those are both big into her history. We have a couple episodes from our Fire and Blood coverage on Jaehaerys and Alicent. One is called The New Old Tower of Joy, and one is called The Ascension of Jaehaerys and Alicent. And, of course, there's a lot to do with their reign, given how long it was. We're also, of course, going to have out our interview with George R. R. Martin before Saturday's stream. And don't forget to check out our short synopses before each episode. They'll get you sort of set up, make sure you had all the details, make sure you understood what was going on. And, of course, one last shout out for our awesome new House of the Dragon intro by Bran Winslow, aka Bran the Builder. We're so happy with it. He's going to be modifying it during the season, kind of like the original Game of Thrones intro, how they would change it, like add a location here and there to just give it a little spice to make sure you always pay attention. Well, Bran's going to be doing similar stuff with ours, so you're going to want to watch that every time.
Oh, do you want to get a cat, Sean? Is it quick while I play the intro, or is that a thing? Do you have time?
I can do that.
I'll play I'm gonna play our intro as the outro for at least some weeks, but most of the time it'll just be our intro. But I'll play the outro, and if you stay past the outro, you'll see Sean back with a cat.
That's right.
So that's it, right?
That is right. So everyone, thanks again for coming. We are just getting started. It's only season 1. There's going to be multiple seasons of this. We got 9 more episodes, and then plenty to talk about in between.
And we have one more shout out. Direwolf City is going live right now at 8:30. They'll be live every Monday at 8:30. So you should be able to catch them right after our stream every Monday.
That's
and we
right.
will be having them as a guest later this month or next month or whatever.
Speaking of other friends of the show, Radio Westeros will be one of who we've done lots of TV show coverage with in the past. Their streams are every Tuesday, so
At
shout
7.
them out as well. And we'll also have them on as a guest, and I think we might be going on theirs as a guest as well at some point. We'll see.
Yeah,
That's all in the scheduling works as of this moment, which is Monday, August 22nd.
Oh, there's Sean back with a cat before I even played the outro. Oh, it's Jet. Nice.
Well, we know that Jet
kitty.
would be on the blacks out of
Yeah.
the blacks and greens.
Yeah, I think so. For sure. Look at that cat.
Yeah.
So yes, thanks y'all for joining us, and we'll see you Saturday at 3 p.m. for a spoilery chat with Joe Magician.
Goodbye, everyone. Happy new House of the Dragon season.
Oh, oops.